I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, degenerate sleuths of the night. We gather to boldly go where others have refused. Welcome to the DT show, you salty mofos.
A man accused of killing 4 college students is behind bars, and he has ties to northeastern and central Pennsylvania. State police say 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger was arrested this morning at a home in Chestnut Hill Township.
I can't find any case law that would support that idea. That somehow a warrant would be needed for DNA left at a crime scene.
We are expected to learn more about the allegations against the girlfriend of a Boston police officer who was found unresponsive in the snow Saturday morning. I-team sources say Karen Reed was in a relationship with John O'Keefe. She's facing charges including motor vehicle homicide and manslaughter.
So, the Commonwealth just provided the court with information that causes me grave concern. The implications of that information may have profound effects on this defense and defense counsel.
So, get your popcorn ready and your choice of drink. Get your butt on your seat. Like, comment, and subscribe for a treat. Here we go. It's time for the show. The Drunk Turkey Show.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the show. An unanticipated episode or video or live today. We have some documents that were dropped. I was going to be on Kelly's channel, What's the Obsession, and we're going to talk about the Bryan Kohberger case. Any docs if may be dropped, but unfortunately she's not feeling so well, and I wish her best recovery right now. Nothing serious, just not feeling well, and I'm sure we'll be rescheduling that live at another time. So, but here we are here. And we have a lot of documents to be dropped that dropped. A lot of stuff that I've been saying for a while, maybe even certain terms and words that I've been saying for some time, that I think we're going to be finally seeing coming out on these documents here. And maybe I'll be revealing some stuff. Who knows? But first and foremost, let's subscribe. Let's get everything out there. We just hit 43,000 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you so much, guys. We're trying to raise everything up on the TikTok side. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. We're talking about the Bryan Kohberger case tonight. We also have X, Twitch, Facebook, Rumble, all going on at the same time right now. Want to thank all of you guys for tuning in. Like, subscribe, follow, everything that needs to be done. What's going on, Unravel? See you in the live chat. Howdy, how's it going? I want to say thank you to the mods and to our members. Also, if you're interested in becoming a member, I'm going to have to put a link. I haven't put one up in a couple of days, but I'll put a link. It's for the YouTube membership. I'll put a link in the playlist there, or not in the playlist. I apologize. In the posts for members of our Discord link. That way you guys can come in. We can have a conversation about not just the Bryan Kohberger case, but we also talk about the Karen Reed case. If you just want to have a discussion on anything in particular, sometimes we talk about UFOs and Bigfoot. So, you can get a better chance to get to know myself and the rest of the DTS crew there at the Discord channel. So you don't want to miss it. A lot of breaking news gets done there. Tons of it. So want to say thank you. And hey, thank you, Green-Eyed Brad, for sharing the live. I encourage more people to do so as well, especially there on the TikTok. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. Let's break it down. Oh, wait, before we do, we have a super chat coming in from Nikki, $2.79 saying DTS family for the win. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you guys. All right, so let's do this. So there was a lot of documents that were dropped in the Bryan Kohberger case earlier today. So many. I mean, I actually initially had posted this live to have started at around 7:35 because I didn't think I was going to be able to get through all of them, but I read through majority of it. There's still some of it I haven't gotten completely through, but a lot of it is, well, not necessarily irrelevant, just kind of out of the scope of what we talk about here on the channel. Maybe, for instance, some of it might be out of the that we may need to get our friend Dr. Vanna back on to discuss when it comes to like the autism stuff, et cetera, et cetera. You know, get a professional, somebody who knows what they're talking about, like we did last time, and that way we can get a better understanding of what these documents mean. But let's go over the ones that we do know and the ones that we can discuss. So we're going to be starting off with the state's response to the defendant's motion to eliminate inflammatory evidence. Now comes Bryan Kohberger, who replies to the state's response to his motion to eliminate seeking the order regarding inflammatory evidence. Mr. Kohberger in his motion recognized the rules of evidence and noticed the pre-judicial evidence is subject to a balancing test. So he understands that it's not just straightforward. When it comes to inflammatory evidence, the state's objection is based on semantics. Mr. Kohberger's motion seeks an order preventing the state from introducing inflammatory evidence. Kohberger does not yet know what exhibits the state will offer. He does not yet know what testimony will the state will elicit, and yet does not know the arguments the prosecutor will make. He is seeking an order preventing this trial from being inflected with inflammatory evidence. So he has no idea what he's going to say. He just knows that whatever he does say is going to be inflammatory against him, so to speak. I mean, that's a joke, right? In reality, what this is that they want to make sure that there isn't, and I necessarily don't agree with it, but like, for instance, in this instance here, it talks about a situation where during a trial, a prosecutor called the deceased husband to the stand and asked repeated questions, beginning the sentence with a variation of the phrase "run over your wife." Now, these are impact statements that are going to have an effect on the jury, obviously, but these are also statements that are true in fact. I mean, I'm not familiar with this case that they're referring to, and when it comes to the Ellington case, but apparently somebody got ran over by a vehicle, and somebody's wife was ran over, and apparently they don't want, for instance, things like somebody murdered your friend or stabbed your friend, which is going to be odd or hard to understand or go through the context of this crime without inferring some of those things. And so I think this is a long shot by them. They also had mentioned in another previous document that they didn't want photos of the crime scene basically shown. They just wanted them basically to be described. That I don't agree with to a certain extent. I agree that the photos of the victims should not be shown to the public, but to the jury, that's a different story. The jury needs to see, the entire scope of what had occurred, because the jury is the one that is going to determine whether or not this person is guilty or innocent. And this is a death penalty case. As you can tell, they're going to have to make a decision either themselves or the judge on that. And knowing that that is the outcome or a potential outcome, the DP is a potential outcome. They need to know the gravity in this of the entire crime, which would result in seeing the injuries that were sustained from the alleged Bryan Kohberger. And so we'll take that one off. I don't think they're going to win that one, to be 110% honest with you. You guys let me know what you guys think. Let me know. Hey, what's going on, Jaime? Jaime's on the TikTok. Well, good to see you, my man. We need to get you back up here. Oh, wrong one. This one's not there yet. All right, this is the next one. This is the reply to the state's response. The first few of them that we're going to go through are going to be the defendant's response. And then here in a second, we're going to go through what the prosecution had to say and their response, which, as the title of the show says, there's some bombs that we're going to be expecting in this one. So this is the the defendant's document still. This is the reply to the state's response to the defendant's motion for vague and undisclosed expert testimony. Comes now. Bryan Kohberger replies to the state's response motion in limine 2 of vague and undisclosed expert testimony. It says Latah County began prosecuting Mr. Kohberger in December of 2022. The state had the benefit of 6 weeks access to the scene. I mean, I'm not really sure it's like a benefit, right? They had, yes, access to the scene prior to Bryan Kohberger, but that's because Bryan Kohberger had not yet been arrested. I think this is a odd thing, right? Plus, speedy trial in Idaho, and I understand he waived it in this and the third, but speedy trial in Idaho is 6 months. And so they've had over 6 weeks since then to have access to all of the information and to whatever information that the state had when it had it. Obviously, there were some things that they were looking for, and there were some motions of compel that have gone through. And according to the defense, they claim that it was slow. The state has dropped in a response to it, basically stating that some of the things that they were asking for were repetitive and things that had already been turned over, some of the things they hadn't had, and that they themselves were waiting on. And so they got it when the state had it. And to me, I haven't seen anything of any nefarious action by the prosecution. All right, let's see. The state had the benefit of 6 weeks access to the scene. Law enforcement expert analyzing the scene. Experts ready to and available to assist with several search warrants and expert advice. One example, the state's Amazon expert Cox, and a second more extreme example is the FBI SA balance. Many of these expert disclosures are based on evidence and data that has still not yet been disclosed to Mr. Kohberger. This particularly is true for SA balance, whose ever-changing reports and opinions are based on material that has not yet been provided to Mr. Kohberger. To assist the court, Mr. Kohberger appends Exhibit 1 to this motion to guide the chronological disclosures of the lack of detail. It identifies each expert and limits the disclosure. The state cannot allow the benefit of what they have done. Mr. Kohberger, recognizing to the state was doing, filed the motion to compel disclosures and the motion to extend his deadline. Basically, what they're saying is that, remember when they asked about Bryan Kohberger's alibi, and he comes up with this partial alibi that he was driving in a different direction and that his phone didn't turn off until 2:54, not 2:47. And remember when they said that he did not even that. Let's go back a little bit further, actually. Remember when he said that he was traveling south and southwest, including Wawa Park, and was stargazing and all that? Well, when they said that, Balance and the FBI went back and redid their work to determine if what he was saying could be verified. I mean, at the end of the day, they're trying to find out the truth. And if, let's just say, Bryan Kohberger did in fact drive in that direction and there was some sort of evidence or proof that showed him at a different location at the time of the murders, then, they're going to be looking for they got the wrong guy and they need to go find the right guy. And, him giving up information like that, also, they're going to for sure make sure and go and test to determine whether or not that, based on the information that they had, if it's feasible for him to have committed the crime. Now, we're going to go through some documents in a little bit, and one of the state's response is going to be a camera at the Floyd Cannabis Shop. I believe it was at 3:07 or 6 a.m. Maybe it was 3:02, but it was somewhere around that time between that 3:02 and 3:05 time frame. And his phone turning off at 2:54. It's about 6 miles away from where his phone turned off. So he'd be driving a mile a minute, which is about 60 miles an hour to get to no, not even let's see, for him to get 6 miles in 6 minutes, he'd have to drive a mile a minute there, 60 miles an hour to get there in time. So we're going to go through that here in a little bit, and we're going to see that. But their complaint is that they went back and looked at their work after Bryan Kohberger had given up the fact that he was at the Wawa Park. And I think that they were anticipating, which is a weird anticipation to have, that or a weird hope to have is that they would provide this information and that the prosecution wasn't going to try to go and confirm that it was either feasible, plausible, or it did happen what he was claiming to have occurred. And so from what I understand, I mean, simple math, 6 miles, took him about 7 minutes to pass by there. And it's not driving outside of the realm of impossibility to get there. So I don't see it as exactly exculpatory that he was traveling southbound, but we'll go through that. But that is the gist of this document here. Let's move on to the next one. And before we do, let's look at a couple of super chats here real quick. We already talked about, thank you, Nikki. And we also have Nino Drew coming in with a 199 super sticker. Thank you so much. Jaime says, don't I get started on aliens? Yeah. Well, Bryan Kohberger may here in a second. Let's see. The next one is the reply to the state's response to the defendant's motion in limine, witness identification by bushy eyebrows. So remember, they had that picture, Bryan Kohberger looking like a vampire, real thin, real pale. I mean, the guy don't look like he's seen the sun in a few days. Has a smirk on his face, looks like he's in absolute bliss. Has a little bit of something on his neck. It looks like a little bit of a scratch. That picture there kind of is an indication of how he looked at the time in which that these murders had occurred. And they're highlighting how bushy his eyebrows were. I mean, he's super pale, but he's also super skinny, comparable to where he is right now. And in pictures that we've seen of him, I think there's another photo of him back in 2020 where he looks kind of comparable to that image that he took on the early morning hour, or about 10 a.m. or 10:30 on November 13th, 2022, shortly after, about 6 hours after the murders. So, looks very anorexically pale. I mean, to me, he looks like he's on something. And when you try to recount the events of that day and night, law enforcement knows what he was doing all day Saturday. And then all night Saturday night, I mean, he goes out there, allegedly commits a quadruple homicide, and then is driving throughout the entire day and doesn't really go home again and finish until the evening time, because he's back out in the area where his phone was off for an extended period of time throughout that next day. Just kind of weird, right? But they want to use that image to indicate how bushy his eyebrows were, to validate what Dylan Mortenson had been stating. And so let's go through this. And this says, here comes now Bryan Kohberger replies to the state's response to the defendant's motion in limine. Witness identification by bushy eyebrows. Mistaken identifications have been one of the leading causes for wrongful convictions in the United States for decades and still are. In this case, if DM is allowed to say that she saw bushy eyebrows, it would not be different than her pointing to Mr. Kohberger and saying that is him. I don't think that is the case, because there's multiple occasions where she was asked, or asked to identify Bryan Kohberger after his arrest, and she was unable to do so, saying, I don't know. It is unclear. The only thing that she knows is that the individual had bushy eyebrows. And so, he doesn't even physically appear to be the same as he was during the time of the murders. And so I don't necessarily believe that that's going to be the case. Now, you can look at the picture and say, hey, that's him. I guess maybe you have more of an argument with the picture, but, an indication of what he looked like during the time of when the murders had occurred it's not something, it's something that I highly doubt will not be allowed into court. I mean, that's a huge piece of evidence that they have. He got some headphones in his ears too. I wonder what he's listening to. A lot of people have said one thing or another. I still think it's Huey Lewis. Let's see. Let's continue. The photo of Mr. Kohberger that the state attached to his response is not relevant and is overly prejudicial. This is akin to the state trying to identify Mr. Kohberger for DM to create its own corroboration for her. DM previously stated that she could not identify him. There are literally millions of people in the world who might describe having bushy eyebrows. The term itself is subjective, and DM has a fascination with drawing eyes and eyebrows. motion limiting exhibit 4 and 5. And we've seen these images, and there's a couple of pictures that she's drawn. I wouldn't say it's a fascination, but this is another indication and an example of how defense attorneys will, really have a way of words and saying things with, and are allowed to get away with certain things like this by, stepping over a boundary, but not necessarily lying, right? So saying she has a fascination with drawing eyebrows. The state contends that DM statements are independently reliable as law enforcement did not employ a witness identification procedure. Mr. Kohberger is not suggesting DM's descriptive words were developed in conjure with a lineup. DM was interviewed 5 times, and I think that's important that she was interviewed 5 times. And in each of the times she spoke about the bushy eyebrows, she did not defer off of what she said she saw, which was a Caucasian male, thin, slim build with bushy eyebrows, wearing all dark and covered with a mask that covered his nose and mouth and forehead. So, it's been fairly consistent. And I think that's one of the things that, although Bryan Kohberger is trying to utilize as a defense of his, stating that she was interviewed so many times, the fact that she didn't weave off of her description kind of solidifies certain facts, right? Maybe perhaps there are certain things that maybe she mentioned once or maybe early on, but not again, or whatever the case, that you might be able to say, okay, maybe that, we might have to look past that. But for the majority of it has been very consistent since the time that she called 911 or the time that Bethany called 911. So take that for what that is. The third interview on November 17th, DM was interviewed by Detective Gooch, who asked DM, I hope I pronounced that right, if she knew what a balaclava was, and shown her a picture. And we have a picture of, and in the fourth interview on December 1st, so the next interview, a couple weeks later, DM drew a mask for the interviewer. So basically what they're saying is that because the detective asked if she knew what that mask was, that was, that she may have gone, looked it up, and that was her inspiration for her drawing. And they have a copy of said drawing. Let's scroll it down. And here it is. It sure does look like that sort of mask, like a ninja mask. It looks remarkably similar to the balaclava mask. Now, it may look remarkably similar because the detective asked it, but it also could look remarkably similar because that's what she saw, right? So there's the difference there. Should the court apply the 5-factor balancing test to elevate the witness reliability, it should not ignore either the limited amount of time that Dylan had to view the intruder or her state of intoxication. A witness is less likely to provide an accurate identification from a fleeting view, and a witness' attention is likely compromised when they are intoxicated. And they have a list of what she drank. So on Saturday, November 12th, through the early morning hours of Sunday, November 13th, DM had consumed champagne, 9 to 10 seltzers. These are White Claws with 5% alcohol. So she had almost a 12-pack herself, 9 to 10 of them. Borg, a concoction of hard alcohol water flavoring in a big plastic jug, an unknown amount of alcohol while participating in a drinking game, probably beer pong or one of the other things that most kids play. Footnote just recites the alcohol consumed in the approximate 24-hour period does not include alcohol consumption in the immediate days prior to November 12th. Now, I have a question, because on November 12th, does that include like at 12 a.m. November 12th, which would have been Friday night going into Saturday, which would have included that big party that they had the night before? I mean, this does seem like a lot of alcohol for one night, because it says just recites the alcohol consumed in an approximately 24-hour period. Does not include alcohol consumed the immediate days prior to November 12th. Could be that one night, but that's no laws with White Claws, so it doesn't count. Borg equals blackout rage gallon. Interesting. So she had a lot of drink. It doesn't say she mixed anything with any type of intoxicating drugs or narcotics. So for those that are still pushing this drug narrative, that's not even something that was in her system, or something that that the defense is even themselves, the defense is looking at as a possibility of what she may have been under the influence of. DM saw the intruder briefly in the dark hallway, and in her own words, was probably very drunk and tired when she saw the intruder at 4 a.m. And they also go in to say that in this case, not only was there an 8-hour delay in the reporting prior to the first law enforcement interview, DM was allowed to mingle with Bethany and other friends. Law enforcement did not separate all the friends who came to 1122 King Road prior to the interviews, and no warnings were given not to discuss the facts, and no effort was made to limit such a discussion. Many of the friends who were at the 1122 King Road when police arrived also stayed in the same hotel room the night of November 13, 2022. There were also extensive media coverage. Post-event misinformation must be considered as a factor on the accuracy of DM's memory retention. By the time DM testifies, almost 3 years would have passed, and we've gone through that part. That's all because of Mr. Kohberger. And he wants to delay this even more. But they're trying to get the bushy eyebrows thing thrown out. I don't think this is going to be something that flies. I think this is going to be I think the defense is just throwing a bunch of mud, guys. I think that's what we've been seeing, is just a bunch of mud being thrown on the wall. It was game weekend, that weekend chilling. It was the Vandals last homecoming game. And that weekend they had a party. The victims had a party at their house, the 1122 King Road residence. There was a party, I believe, at a couple of houses in that neighborhood. And then the party turned over on Saturday to the Sigma Chi. And I think there was another party that Ethan went to with his brother and sister before going to Sigma Chi party with Xana. Those were the parties that were going on that night that were the big ones. Neighbors in the area had described that night as awkwardly silent and quiet. All right. The next one is going to be the state's response, reply to the state's response for the limiting on the Amazon click activity at evidence at trial. Coming now, Bryan Kohberger replies to the state's response. For the first time on March 14, 2025, the state provided an expert disclosure of opinions of Shane Cox and federal agent Michael Douglas regarding their opinions related to an Amazon records. This is an example of abusive discovery tactics by the state. But here's the thing, right? So these guys are just going to go in there and kind of say that he purchased this and this is his click activity, right? They're just pointing at facts and things that were purchased. And the argument from the state side has been, and I think even the court has mentioned that the only thing that is that they're discussing are pointing at facts that were purchased, like looking at a graph saying, all right, on this date and time, this person purchased that. It's not necessarily something that you need like this entire expert to go up there and point out and give a dissertation and methodology and all these other things about just pointing out things that are on the wall. Now, the state seeks to use expert testimony to show a very narrow set of Amazon records of purchases and click history related to a K-bar knife and sheath. Makes it more probable than it would be without the evidence that the K-bar knife sheath found at the crime scene was Bryan Kohberger's, and that the click activity after the homicides make it more probable than it would be without the evidence that Kohberger had reason to search for a K-bar knife and sheath after the homicides, basically meaning that because he no longer had his. Whether it be to be a replacement in case, the feds came knocking or the police came knocking, or whether it be that he had another victim in mind and another unfortunate, murder to be planned out. Fortunately, it didn't come to pass, at least to our knowledge. All right, let's see. Asserting that lay testimony would be appropriate for these issues, the state claims that Mr. Cox is not needed as an expert because Amazon records speak for themselves, which is basically what I just said. The Amazon records speak for themselves. You're just looking at what date and time that he purchased, this or that. Set forth in Mr. Howell's declaration. Mr. Howells is the defense's witness. Amazon data is complex. There is nothing about its production, review, or analysis, algorithm, or machine learning that lay witness could explain to a jury without prior explanation. Expert explanation of the data itself is misleading, especially incomplete and cherry-picked data, as in this case. And cherry-picked data, as the state has responded, as saying information or data relevant to the case, whether it be a K-bar knife, is what they're considering cherry-pick, which is the K-bar knife, its sheath, the sharpener, and other items as well. And then they go on to say this. So the state ignores that the Amazon records reflect a household of users on the Amazon account at issue and long list of items purchased over a period of several months for a road trip or hiking, to include a roadside repair kit, a tire inflator, a backpack, and bear spray. He's going to go out in the woods, going to do some hiking. The backpack, I wonder if he still has. Features like customers also frequently bought together, omni-channel influence, and household accounts with multiple users have significant impact on what is considered click data. So I guess he's blaming his mom and dad and his sisters for looking up K-bar knives and hiking equipment and all these other things that are going to be used against him. It was his family that were looking at these things. He purchased the K-bar knife because it was with his credit card. It was his financial records, but everything else, all those other searches, could have been his sister. Yeah. Jeannie asks him, $4.99, why do you think he's listening to Huey Lewis? And if so, what song? So the picture looks oddly like from the movie American Psycho with Christian Bale. In that movie, he is a serial offender. He takes the lives of many people. And in that movie, he is portrayed with with headphones in a couple of scenes, and he's listening to Huey Lewis. And then during the time in which he was taking the life of one of his one of the persons who in which he was around, one of his victims, he talks about Huey Lewis and their songs, and it's a song that he plays, and it's eerily similar to that picture. And the main character, his name is Patrick Bateman, and starts off kind of showing his like regimen, right? He talks about who he is, or who Patrick Bateman is. He's 27, which is also the same age as Bryan Kohberger at the time of the incident. Bryan Kohberger's birthday was November 22nd, so November 13th, it was just a week before, plus 1122 is the address. Kind of weird, right? Plus then you also have the fact that, people ask why that night. Maybe he had this illusions of grandeur, which we know from some of his writings that ended up being the case. Maybe he idolized certain movies, films, serial killers, things of that nature. And I think American Psycho may have been one based off of that image. Now, the interesting thing about it is that during the intro or the beginning part, and I think you can find it on YouTube, just look up walk scene. No, the walk scene. Well, the walk scene will show you where he's listening to the music and he has the headphones on. But I think there's another one where it talks about his day or whatever, or how he starts his day. And he's in the shower and he's talking about all these items that he utilizes on his face. And he's wearing this mask, and it's like a clear mask on his face. And it's to take out pores and things of that nature. And it's like a beauty mask. And he's talking about wearing a mask because in reality, he's not there. There's nothing there. It's just, he's just out there. and that he has no feelings or any of those things, and it's just all a mask, and that, you know, he was using that beauty mask as a metaphor for him not having a mask as who Patrick Bateman is. And I find it very similar to Bryan Kohberger, and I think that if you go back to, I think it's this Tappa Talk, or I don't know what it was, he was talking about not having feelings. He called himself an a-hole, and he said that his dad was a sack of meat and treats him like trash, and that he was a sack of meat, and all these other things. It sounds so eerily similar to what Patrick Bateman was saying, almost like if he had listened and watched that movie a few times and was picturing himself, even at that young age, because that movie came out in 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. And so I just think that if it ends up being Huey Lewis, that'd be weird. That would be weird. Just kind of like his alibi, right? Walleye Park. You know, he's claiming he was out there that night. The night that, let's just say he committed this, that he commits a quadruple homicide. He says that his alibi is in the same location where Joyce LePage was found, an unsolved murder that happened back in the 70s, I think early 70s. She was found in the same park, wrapped up in a WSU rug. And it was rumored, or was theorized by some, that Ted Bundy may have been involved, and that may have been his first. Now, I think a lot of people may believe that that's not the case. Some may even believe that they've ruled it out, that it was Bundy. Now, whether it was Bundy or not has no meaning to anybody else other than Bryan Kohberger. Did he think it was Bundy? You know, Bundy was somebody that his mom had spoken about. You know, I think she had written about. He went to he studied into sales under Dr. Ramsland, Kathleen Ramsland, who studied Ted Bundy and BTK, and even spoke about a specific class that Bryan Kohberger took with her, which was violent crimes. And they read the book Confessions of a Serial Killer, the autobiography of BTK Dennis Rader. And that was the specific class that she taught Bryan Kohberger. And so did he think that that was a case, or was he aware of the rumor and was aware of the unsolved murder? And if those things are true, that he was aware and maybe perhaps even believed this, what does that add to this case where he says that was potentially his alibi, was in the same location there? I think it could be portrayed as paying homage to Ted Bundy to a certain extent. And, you know, in the movie American Psycho, he brings up Ted Bundy and Ed Gein and other serial killers throughout the movie. And it's just kind of odd that that's kind of the same thing that Bryan Kohberger does, but through his studies. You know what I mean? So interesting coincidences, and we'll leave them at that. But thank you for the question. Thank you for all you do and staying consistent and bringing the facts. I appreciate that, Kiki. And thank you for your $5 super chat. I hope that all made sense. I hope that all made sense. Hey, what's going on, Kelly? Good to see you here. Good to see you. Hope you're feeling better. Hope you're feeling better. But yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking when it came to, you know, what is he listening to? Maybe it's Huey Lewis. All right, let's see. Let's continue this. So this is the make and model of suspect vehicle. This is his response to the state's response. Mr. Kohberger's motion to sought out to prevent the state from saying that the vehicle depicted in the 1112 King Road camera was a Hyundai Elantra, and that the vehicle is the same vehicle identified as an Elantra on the 1125 King Road camera. This is in the province of the jury. The state points out there is no continuous video stream that observed the path of travel. As the state points out, they cannot show a vehicle at 1112 King continuously moving to the location of 1125 Ridge Road, because there are two separate videos, separate by distance, an opportunity for others to drive or park, an opportunity for other vehicles to appear on camera. It is a question for the jury. It is a question for the jury. but they want it out. But you're saying it's a question for the jury. So, yeah, leave it for a question for the jury. Is it the same car? That's what you're going to have to ask the jury, but you're going to have to present it in order to do so, right? So I don't understand, them trying to remove this or whatever they're trying to remove. They're going against their own motion here. The state's argument would make sense if Kohberger sought an exclusion of the 1112 video. He seeks exclusion of speculative statements that are in the province of the jury. Mr. Kohberger is not seeking to exclude SA emails testimony on the grounds, special agent emails testimony on the grounds. On these grounds, his testimony about what make and model of the vehicle at 1112 King Road will be subject to cross-examination at trial. So basically what this is all saying is that they're going to try to question special agent emails, 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra initial, what do you call it, findings, right? And he thought that's what it was. And then later he opened it up, especially after seeing the 1125 Ridge Road. And so they want to keep the 1112 King Road to show that it is in a 2011 to 13, and potentially want to also keep the other one on Ridge Road, not necessarily to say that this is not the same vehicle, but to say that there are two vehicles that are matching the description of what you see there out and about that night, which should bring in some question of which one is Bryan Kohberger's or something to that nature, right? It's a really bad argument, because let's look at it, right? Let's actually take a peek at this. So here's 1125 Ridge Road. Now, I'm not entirely sure if they catch him coming this direction, the direction of the white line, because he's seen on Moscow Sunset Mark right here on camera. Boom, crossing here. And then I'm assuming he's seen here at 1125 Ridge Road. And then 1320 Linda Lane, here the vehicle is seen again. And then the vehicle is seen here coming into King Road. Now, because there are breaks, right? You have a break here in between the Sunset Mart and Ridge Road, which may not be that big of a break, right? Because you might be able to see taillights going in the distance, and you might be able to see something coming, like headlights coming in the distance. So they're not arguing that one. They do argue the Linda Lane one, and they're arguing the King Road one. So you have what they're saying is that the vehicle that is traveling right here either turned up this direction or that direction, and at the same time, the real vehicle that is seen on the 1122 King Road or 1112 King Road video camera is seen pulling in around this direction. I'm sorry for TikTok that's not going to be able to see this. It doesn't make sense. I mean, I get it, but there's no other documentation of a white vehicle seen up here in this area, at the same time as this other vehicle. There's no cameras that show both of these cars at the same time, even if they were in two different locations. It shows the vehicle passing at 1125 Ridge Road, and then 2 minutes later, it's passing 1320 Linda Lane, which is about a third of a mile away, which is about the amount of time that you would have expected it to have passed if you're going about 25 miles an hour. There's stop signs and things of that nature in between there. And then another minute or so, it's seen pulling into the King Queen Road intersection. And so, if you're driving this area, it pops out exactly when you would have expected it to pop out. What are the chances there's another vehicle just maybe 1 year or 2 years newer or older in the same vicinity without a front license plate that just so happens to pull in at that same time of this video here at 1125 Ridge Road, and that person matches Bryan Kohberger's height, weight, and bushy eyebrows, and also has his DNA on his person because he has Bryan Kohberger's sheath. I mean, the likelihood of this happening is so wow. I mean, that would have to happen there. And that person would also have had to be in the person who's framing Bryan Kohberger, because remember, it's a frame job. Somebody placed his sheath there. The real killer who framed him would have had to have popped out at 13:20 at the right time, and whoever's driving at 11:25 had to have turned away at the right time too and gone a different direction. I mean, what is the chances of that interaction happening at that intersection like that? I mean, it's got to be so. I mean, I think that the likelihood that the DNA belonged to somebody else, which was what, 1 in like 8 octillion, I think that has a better chance than all that happening at this intersection. That the real killer is pulling in right before that other camera starts to record, or starts to, that picks up the white car passing. The 2015 Elantra that passed by 1125 Ridge Road would have had to have turned off. The one that turned on at that right at that moment, the person driving it would have had to have matched Bryan Kohberger's height and weight, had Bryan Kohberger's knife sheath with his DNA, had to commit this crime at the exact same time that Bryan Kohberger's phone is off. And we have now been able to determine that it was off. Right in that intersection. I mean, it's just, at this point, you know, you're probably hoping for a plea deal, my man. You know? Lee, you're asking me to stop, but it is what it is. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, the likelihood of that happening is just so. I know there's a lot of people that think he's innocent, but that's damn near impossible for all those things to fall into play at that one intersection. For all that to come into play at that one intersection is just impossible. So that's why they want it out. That's why they want it out. I'm thinking the guy's guilty. That's just me. That's just me. This is a little bit later. I'm going to fix it. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, this is the defendants. This is, okay, so now we're in the state. This is the state's reply. So now we just finished up with the defense and their documents. And what they've had to say. I mean, those were documents that were supposed to be in favor of Bryan Kohberger. Everything that I have read up to this point was supposed to be in favor of Bryan Kohberger. That tells you how weak his defense is that we're looking at his documents and it's making him look more guilty. But that's because he's having to argue and defend himself against facts of the case. And when you committed the crime, there's not much of these facts that you can defend yourself on. So there it is. All right, let's talk about the state's documents, because I think the state's documents paint even more of a clear picture that this guy did this crime. So let's see. Let's break it down. Comes now the state of Idaho and submits the following reply to the March 17th, 2025 defendant's response to state's motion eliminating neurological psychiatric evidence. The defendant is, in his response to the state's motion, has clarified that he apparently has at least two separate purposes for the proposed evidence: to explain how the defendant appears before the jury, and to rebut what the defendant anticipates may be evidence from the state regarding suspiciousness, unusual, other odd physical or social behavior. The defendant has now also included a declaration by Dr. Jeffrey Lewin regarding physical conditions of the defendant. This is the first the state has heard of Dr. Lewin. So first and foremost, how do they, it sounds like the defense is really concerned about how Bryan Kohberger is going to act during trial. I wonder if he's had any outbursts or anything like that during their conversations. I wonder if he's gotten really mad or if he's made looks or scared them even, because majority of his attorneys are female, which I think is purposeful. I think that is to show that he is okay handling or being around women, yet these women are very concerned about his behavior in front of the jury, how his reactions are going to be. Just want to throw that out. Like, what have they seen that they're trying to put this out there? And the state is like, wow, like during this, they're asking, like, well, how do you expect him to behave? Like, is he out of control? Like, what's going on here? Thank you, Scott. Scott says, what's your opinion of Jay Embry? How he even has a fan base is something I can't wrap my head around. If you don't comment on other channels, I understand. Keep doing good work. I really don't comment on other channels, Scott. I appreciate the $10. I just will say that I've tried to watch some of it, and I can't get very far because it's so off. I'm honest. It is. A lot of it's pretty badly off, but that is what it is. Also, guys, let's hit the like button. We have a 1,500 like goal. Let's get to that. If everybody hits likes, we like right now, we'll get over probably about 1,000 likes. And so replay crew, we're going to need you to hit up with the rest of it, but let's get those likes going. All right, let's go back to this. The defendant in his response to state clarified. All right. First, addressing the issue of the defendant's behavior and appearance as they may be perceived by the jury. The defense offers no authority, statutory or otherwise, to allow him to present evidence purportedly explaining how he may appear or behave in front of the jury. The state is unaware of any such authority. All right. Not only would this type of evidence be completely irrelevant and immaterial to the legal and natural fact of this case. Let's see. When the defendant opposed the state's request for an independent mental evaluation, the defendant tried to argue that Idaho code was limited to mental conditions as they relate to the elements of the charged offense. The Idaho Supreme Court withheld otherwise. So that's crazy that the defendant opposed the state's request for an independent mental evaluation. Why would he be opposed for an independent mental evaluation? Not one from the state, not a state's expert, an independent expert. Let's see. I just want to make sure I'm going over the stuff. At the onset, the state currently does not have any intention of offering evidence during the guilt phase of the defendant's pattern of odd behaviors, such as social miscues with coworkers, professors, students, and others, compulsive hand washing, etc. The state understands that were it to offer such evidence in rebuttal to the defendant would likely be entitled to offer evidence that those behaviors stemmed from his OCD and ASD conditions as opposed to some nefarious purpose. Defendant argues that he has a developmental coordination disorder. That means it was not possible for him to commit these crimes because he lacked necessary speed and coordination. But that is not what his neuropsychological evaluation found. So his own neurological psychological evaluation determined that that wasn't the case anymore. Yet we have Ann Taylor coming out here saying that he could not have committed these crimes because he lacked coordination and all these other things. Yet his own, there's got to be something for lying, because this is just flat out lying at this point from the defense. The expert who conducted the evaluation, Dr. Orr, listed developmental coordination disorder under the title diagnosis for which Bryan met criteria in the past. Not now, not currently, not in 2022, but in the past. Dr. Orr clearly explains that the motor problems have not impacted his functioning significantly in many years. The extent defendant currently has any motor impairment, even according to his own expert, it affects only his fine motor dexterity and vulnerabilities in visual motor functions. This example she uses is for fine motor dexterity, included when he had poor handwriting and trouble tying his shoes in the past. at 4. At 4 years old. He had poor handwriting and trouble tying his shoes in the past at 4. Okay. She asserts he continues to have difficulty with manipulation of tools even as an adult, but only per parent report. She also points to her observations during the examination that the defendant moved his whole arm and repositioned his upper body slightly to manipulate the items effectively. No reasonable juror could infer from those observations and a diagnosis that implied the defendant in the past that was not possible for the defendant to commit these crimes within he is charged. Neither expert offers any opinions on whether any of his conditions made it more or less likely that he was physically capable of committing the crimes charged. Thus, the expert opinions themselves are inadmissible during the guilt phase because they are not relevant to guilt. There you go. Apparently, Bryan Kohberger had an issue at the age of 4 years old with, tying his shoes and his handwriting, that they were so concerned that they said that he had some kind of complex defined dexterity problems. Yeah. Is what it is. Is what it is. Let's see. The next one is the AT&T timing advance records. All right. Let's see. I got a couple of a super chat real quick. Don't understand why he thinks he qualified to school Pullman PD in cellular and cloud forensics. Duh. Thank you for that. In this case, the homicides occurred on November 13th, 2022. Bryan Kohberger was identified as a suspect December 19th, 2022. Hey, remember when I told you guys, this is, some people are really going to start to think I'm psychic because I said December 19th, 2022 a long time before the pro-burgers found out that it was December 19th, 2022. In fact, many pro-burgers ridiculed me. They called me a liar. They said I didn't know what I was talking about. It was November 25th and this, that, and the third and yada, yada, yada. I said, no, it was December 19th, 2022. And here it is again. Bryan Kohberger was identified as a suspect on December 19th, 2022. Search warrants for his AT&T records were executed on December 23rd, 2022. And at this point, timing advance records were not available for Bryan Kohberger's phone to cover the relevant time period, November 13th, 2022. Despite the defendant's repeat assertions, the fact of the matter is that AT&T did not provide timing records to law enforcement for Bryan Kohberger's phone. The state is attaching the affidavit from AT&T verifying the state did not receive timing advance records for Bryan Kohberger's phone. See attached S1, S2. There's nothing there. Probably didn't even need to read that one. All right. The state's replied to the defendant's objection to the motion to eliminate the 911 call. What happened on December 16th, 2022? He arrived in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, and was seen washing his car. Comes now, the state of Idaho respectfully replies to the defendant's objection to the state's motion and eliminate 911 call filed on March 17, 2025. The defendant relies on DM's and BF's actions from the night before to support his argument that the statements on the 911 call cannot be excited utterances or present sense impressions. This is misplaced. The excitement leading up to and during the 911 call was not caused solely from seeing a male in the home the night before, but from discovering moments earlier from the roommate and or friend was not waking up. This is in addition to realizing that none of the other victims in the home were responding. And they have a adequate or more in-depth, I guess was a transcript of the 911 call. And as you can see, it says Bethany is the person that says hi. I know there were some folks that were out there saying that it was Dylan who was the person that answered the phone. We can tell that from my breakdown of the 911 call that I got it pretty much spot on. If you go and you compare what we're going to see here compared to what I said on the 911 call and listening to it multiple times over and over again. I did have the privilege of listening to it for a few days prior to it being released. So I will say that for those that may have gotten it, not completely accurate, it may have been because I had access to it and I was in no rush to release that information until the moment was right. And so let's continue here. So it states here that BF is the person that answered, and she said, "Hi, something is happening. Something happened in our house, and we don't know what." And if you want to go through that and read it, it just kind of, I recommend going through the 911 call, my breakdown of it. It's even more in depth than this, but it just kind of points out, for instance, it says here, "Hi, this is D." Obviously it's redacted, but on the audio you can hear her say, "Hi, this is Dylan." And I indicated that that's what I was able to hear. And there's certain parts in here where it says like Hunter Johnson, HJ yells out Xana, things like that. Not everything is still in there, so go listen to the breakdown of the 911 call if you haven't had a chance to. I think I did a pretty good job given the fact that I had a few days with it to really listen to it. I had enhanced it so that I could hear everything in the background, and go check that out. Let's see. Yes. We're 1,000. We're almost well, on my screen, I'm showing 1,165 people watching. So that might be on Twitter, might be on Twitch, might be on Rumble, Facebook. Thank you guys for tuning in. We have quite a few here also on TikTok. I can't really see that small on my phone, but thank you guys for tuning in and sticking with us. Let's get those likes up. All right. Based on the above state motion, the court to admit the recordings and transcripts of the 911 call to Whitcomb on November 13th, immediately following the discovery of Xana Kernodle unresponsive. So there you go. All right. Next one is going to be the text messages testimony. So come down, State of Idaho respectfully replies to the defendant's objection to the state's motion in limine text messages and testimony filed on March 17th. Defendant includes additional records from DM and BF's phone for the court's review. However, using records provided in the defendant's response does not change the Idaho Rules Evidence 801-803 analysis. The following phone records are from November 13, 2022 between 2:10 a.m. and 4:37 a.m. starting at 4:19 a.m. DM Dylan makes statements to Bethany regarding seeing an unknown male in the residence. The statements are immediately after she perceived the event. In addition, Dylan and Bethany are under the stress of excitement caused by this startling event and condition. So here it kind of goes through a little bit of what had occurred. At 2:10 in the morning, Dylan calls Eric Grower, who is the Uber driver, inquiring if he was driving. Eric Grower confirms that he was driving at 2:13. At 2:53, Madison Mogen calls Bethany. Who knows how long they spoke for? Doesn't state how long that call was for. Second. And then at 3:51, Dylan creates a new contact in her phone. At this point, the DoorDasher, which we're going to find out was at 3:59 a.m., hasn't even dropped off the food. So I think a lot of people that are looking at this, thinking this is some sort of nefariousness, at this point, Xana was still awake. She was on TikTok. She had ordered some food. There's nothing nefarious about her being on her phone at 3:51 a.m. And then nothing happens until 4:19, where Bethany calls Dylan. At 4:20, see, I think that's an interesting point right there, right? It's not, Dylan's not calling anybody. She's not texting anybody. She's seen somebody just seen somebody walk out. Maybe perhaps she was on the phone at the time that she saw somebody walk out. I don't know, but so let's break this down. There's a screenshot at 4:20, and I think it's like 34 seconds of a vehicle traveling at a high rate of speed on King Road. And so that's about a minute and a half past when Bethany calls. And at this point, Dylan had already seen the guy walk out. Now, either she was on the phone or she was answering the phone when she saw him. And maybe that's why he didn't do anything, because maybe he thought she was on call with 911 and he needed to get out of there as fast as possible. Or he had passed by around 4:18. And so we have 2 minutes there between 4:18 and 4:20 that the vehicle is peeling out. It's not like a mile or an acre property. So parking is probably fairly close. Shouldn't take but a couple of seconds to get in your car. So you got about a minute and a half there of time between when he's peeling out and the time that he walked out or is at his car. I think that's enough time to get undressed and to change. What do you guys think? You guys let me know. I think that's really, really important there. At 4:20, at 4:20, DM calls Xana, and then 20 seconds later she calls Kaylee, and then 8 seconds later she calls Bethany, and they're on the phone for 41 seconds. All right. And then after that phone call, Bethany calls Xana and Dylan is calling Maddie. Bethany then calls Ethan. And then at 4:22, Dylan tells Bethany no one's answering. Dylan also says, I'm really confused. And then she texts Kaylee saying Kaylee. So, these guys go back and forth, right? And you look here, Dylan says it's like a ski mask almost. So when we get to that balaclava mask that we looked at earlier, she's describing something that was like a ski mask almost. So there you go. Let's see. He had something over his head and a little and mouth. So she says, come down here, run down here. That's at 4:24. So about 5 minutes after the initial phone call. And then at about 10 seconds later, Dylan's calling Ethan. And then Dylan's calling Bethany. And then Bethany's calling Dylan. Or I don't know if it's calls. It's just two. So I'm assuming there might be some text messages. I think that's the one that says, I'm screwed. And then Bethany's like, I know, but at least you won't be alone. But it's not that she's screwed. It's she's scared. I know a lot of people are trying to say that she's saying screwed because it's SCRWD or something like that. But the R was capitalized. And if you look at where the caps button on a phone is right next to the A. So it's not like she meant to capitalize the R. There was another button that was meant to be pressed, and it was the A. So it's SCARWD. Now the W is probably accidental and it's supposed to be an E. And so now I'm scared. And then she's like, I know, but at least you're not alone. And then Dylan makes an outgoing call. I believe that's maybe to a parent. I don't know. But at 4:37, Bethany accesses Instagram and Snapchat, probably trying to reach out to people. As you can see, they're going and calling still Madison and Kaylee and Xana back and forth. At 4:37, it's it. There's no more activity on the phone until 10:23, when Dylan messages Madison saying, are you up? And then at 11:29, Dylan messages Kaylee asking if she's up. At 11:49, Bethany calls JM, and then Bethany calls 911 at 11:56. Kind of indication just to show that these guys really didn't know, what was going on that night. Let's close that one off. I don't know. This one's going to be this one's a long one. This one's like 70 pages long, but it's really not that long, to be honest with you. But we'll go through it. And what I plan on doing is probably going through this one and other ones more in depth again, but we'll cover everything we can from here. Comes now, the state of Idaho respectfully responds to the defendant's objection to the state's motion to eliminate self-authentication records filed on March 17, 2025. The state seeks to rely on self-authentication evidence as opposed to calling foundational witnesses in order to accomplish the same. It is understood the admission would be contingent upon the state relying on proper foundation or certificate affidavit under IR 803. It also understood the admission would be dependent on the state showing relevance of the evidence. And so there was a list of a bunch of pieces of evidence that we kind of gone over, and we were speculating what could be on those pieces of evidence. And well, now we don't need to speculate. They infer and state what they were looking at and what the relevance of the video or the evidence that they have. And in some cases, they do not plan on using any of it, and they indicate that in these documents. So let's continue here. This says here that at 1320 Linda Lane surveillance footage for November 13th. The relevance of this footage is taken on November 13th is approximately 0.3 miles from the 1122 King Road crime scene. The state may rely on video footage from around 3:29 a.m. showing the suspect vehicle in the area of the crime scene prior to the homicide. Then they also have, that was 1320 Linda Lane. They also have 1330 Linda Lane for the same night. And it states here that the relevant footage is taken for November 13, 2022 at approximately 3.3 miles from the King Road crime scene. And the state may rely on video footage of approximately 3:30 a.m. to 4:07 a.m. showing the suspect vehicle traveling around the area of the crime scene prior to the homicides. Next one is going to be in Albertson, Clarkson, Washington video surveillance and business records. The relevant footage is taken on November 13, 2022. And this is in the afternoon-ish, because I think he was in around noon. Oh, it says here between 12:46 p.m. and 1:06 p.m. to show the defendant's vehicle and actions hours after the homicides. That's interesting. So they want to show the defendant's vehicle. You know, it would be crazy if there's something on his vehicle, like a blood stain or something that you can see, like a red mark on the fender or something. Because they want to show his vehicle. What it probably is going to show more than anything is maybe perhaps him cleaning it, maybe perhaps the state of the vehicle, that it didn't have a front license plate, those type of things too. But his actions as well inside of the grocery store. That's interesting. Next one is an Amazon financial and user records for Bryan Kohberger. This is a certificate that was included with an Excel data file, details of Bryan Kohberger's subscription information and order history from January 5th, 2022 to December 13th, 2022. The state intends to offer a certificate with the attached records for the exhibit defendant information. Let's see. Okay. The AT&T phone records for Bryan Kohberger, Maddie, and Xana. Bagel shop surveillance video for November 13th. This is video from approximately 1:40 a.m. to 2 a.m. This evidence provides a timeline of events for Kaylee and Maddie before the homicides. All right. And here in red, I have some things that they had on there that are no longer going to be used. A lot of it's going to be financial records. Some of it's for the victims. Majority is for the victims. Then they have a Cafe Arista video surveillance for November 13th. This is the approximately 1:40 a.m. and it provides more of a timeline of Kaylee and Maddie. This is probably, and I think this is on the way from the corner club to the grub truck. So we're going to see some video. Remember, like the what was it? What did you tell Adam? Everything, all that stuff. Those cameras along that route. Corner club surveillance for November 12th or 13th. And this also just kind of shows more of the timeline. This says that they're looking at from approximately 10:20 to 1:37 a.m. for Maddie and Kaylee. And they're looking at the financial transaction receipts from the corner club of that night as well for Kaylee and Maddie. Costco and Clarkson, Washington surveillance video for November 13th. What's relevant is the footage is taken from November 13, 2022, and it is footage from approximately 11:59 a.m. to show the defendant's vehicle and actions before, after the homicides. Apologize. All right. And then the next one is the sales student records regarding Bryan Kohberger. The state has attached relevant evidence which would be introduced to show the defendant's knowledge of a crime scene. Now we're going to go through this one because he put together this packet of basically how you would investigate a crime. And he put this all together, which, if you reverse the data, would be what to expect of how to get investigated, right? Where law enforcement is going to look, what are they going to try to, where they're going to find evidence, etc. And I think it plays a huge role. It's going to play a huge role. And when we go through it, I'll pick apart pieces of that document. All right. The next one is Dick's Sporting Goods records for sale for Bryan Kohberger. And this is the relevant purchase is for a black Balaclava, the mask, the ninja mask from Dick's Sporting Goods on January 10th, 2022. This mask is the same type of mask described by DM that she witnessed worn by a male in the residence on November 13, 2022. So they think they found the purchase of the black Balaclava mask. Now, I think this is important because my assumption is that by January of 2023, so a year later, that mask was no longer something that you could find. That's my assumption. That's my speculation, my prediction, my premonition, whatever you want to call it. But I'm going to say that mask is missing. So we have some more financial records for Kaylee that are no longer going to be used. This one's interesting, right? So this one states here, DoorDash records for Kaylee for Xana and Ethan. The state may rely on attached records from a DoorDash regarding a delivery to 1122 King Road on November 13th, 2022 at approximately 3:59 a.m. So we got the time frame. It's 3:59, which is, remember, I told you guys that the time that this person went and dropped off these items was going to be right in the middle of which when Bryan Kohberger was not in the area, or the white Elantra wasn't in the area. I believe that it had pulled in and left like at 3:57. So it was 2 minutes out of the area. And you can drive pretty far away from an area in 2 minutes. So 2 minutes after it's out of the area, the DoorDasher goes and drops off some food. Now, DoorDashers don't stay there. They don't chit chat. They drop the item. It's 4 a.m. They're probably going to sleep or ready for their next, maybe just woke up and now ready for the next order, whatever the case may be. But they don't just hang around, right? So take a picture and then go. The next time that the white Elantra is seen in the area is at 4:04. So it was right in the middle between the times in which that vehicle had left the scene and then returned. So if we go back to the Linda Lane video, on the Linda Lane video, you have the vehicle traveled 3 different times as the PCA states. But on the fourth time at 4:05 a.m. when it pulls in, it pauses for about 11 seconds in front of apartment, I think 500. And it's right in front of the camera there. And then it reverses and then it goes back in the direction that it came from. And when it does that, and this is when I had determined, or when we saw that screenshot of the 1112 King Road residence, that's when I was able to determine that what they were seeing was some lights that were reflecting all over the place, which is why they were unsure if the vehicle either did a 3-point turn or an attempt to park or what they were doing. But in the PCA, it states that they believe that he's attempted to either park or do a 3-point turn. And then he goes and does a 3-point turn at the King Queen Road intersection, then comes back towards the victim's residence. You can see it on the Linda Lane footage as it comes back around at 4:06, 4:07 a.m. and then parks probably alongside the house or right in front of it at 4:08 a.m. Now, I had said that there's some suspicious activity there, or not suspicious activity. There's some odd behaviors going on after 4 o'clock. And obviously that's when he decided to go into the house. Now, the home was located on Queen Road, but it was 1122 King Road. So I would assume that might be a little bit tricky to find, especially if you're a DoorDasher who is picked at random. You can't choose your DoorDasher, and you're from Pullman, not necessarily from Moscow, and you may not know the area as well. And I'm assuming that if you're like Xana, who's been reported to have done this often, the DoorDash in the middle of the night or whenever, I would assume that she'd probably be aware of that being an issue. And there might be some sort of indicator for the DoorDasher that this is the address, and that indicator is probably in the form of some sort of light, whether it be inside the house, outside, or a combination of both. And so Bryan Kohberger is passing by the house. He's not knowing that Xana ordered a DoorDash order for food. He knows that there's a light on or an indicator on. Doesn't know what that indicator's for. It could be just that somebody's up and awake. And when he goes back at 4:05, that indicator is off. Let's just assume that it's a light. Well, to him, he may just think, all right, light is on, light is off. It's 4 a.m. I don't think he's assuming somebody's getting food or a DoorDash order, especially if they've been up all night, partying, or been at a party and now, winding down. He may just have assumed that they went to sleep. And so that was now go time. And you see that in those moments, he starts to act odd. And that's when he does the backtrack, can't park, does the 3-point turn. And I even hear a honk while the horn. He honks the horn while he's driving up. And I think that's out of nervousness. I mean, he hasn't even entered the building. He hasn't even gone down or any of those things. So for mistakes to have happened, such as leaving the knife sheath, I think that should be anticipated, especially if this was his first time doing something like this. Mistakes were going to happen no matter how much planning he did. And as we find out here in a little bit on this document, he had some plans for planning. Yeah, we find out it's at 3:59, right in between there. Just kind of like what I had said before. I hope all that made sense. All right. So what is not going to be used, or the state is no longer intending to rely on, are going to be on financial records again for Kaylee, and early warning records, whatever that is. What is going to be used is going to be ENS service 1300 Johnson Avenue, Pullman, Washington, surveillance video. And this is going to be for around 5:26 a.m., showing the suspect vehicle after the homicides pulling into Pullman, Washington. Let's see. Floyd's cannabis surveillance video at November 13, 2022. State rely on video footage from November 13, 2022, around 3:02 a.m. So it's 3:02 a.m., showing the white sedan on Route 270 between Pullman, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho, approximately 1 hour before the homicides. Let's pull up our maps real quick. All right. So this is what I did. I measured this out. This is about 7 miles. Now I'm giving, oh boy, some leeway that he did a U-turn over here. Okay, and so let me just measure how much it is. This distance here. About, if you're actually traveling the way the road curves, you're looking at almost just over half a mile. So what I'm saying is, because his phone supposedly went off at 2:54. 2:54 a.m. So not at 2:47. So at 2:44, he's over here on Nevada Street, right? And this is when the PCA says his phone turns off around 2:47. The defense argues it's actually at 2:54 and that he was still traveling south, not traveling this direction. So that 2:54, over half a mile past when he would have turned on 270R, had he just done a stop, turn around, and done a U-turn from this location here, it's about 6.8 miles to Floyd's cannabis shop. Now, the citation that he gets over here is for a seatbelt violation, and this is in August, but the reason for the pullover was for speeding. The 2 times he got stopped in Indiana were following too close, so we can anticipate that this guy probably has a heavy foot. So 6.8 miles at 2:54. If you're doing 60 miles an hour, that's 7 minutes. 2:54, that's exactly 7 minutes. So there you go. There it is. And he'd be passing right when you'd expected him. Had he been driving, turned his phone off, slam on the brakes, pop a U-turn, go the exact, opposite direction. It goes right there. So it's not outside of the realm of possibility, so to speak. It's very much plausible. But that's the Floyd cannabis that they may be utilizing to say that this is Bryan Kohberger's vehicle. All right. They're going to look at something he purchased with crypto. Forced DAX, crypto.com, financial records for Bryan Kohberger. Relevancy of, so it goes here. It says the state has provided information related to the relevancy of this item in its expert disclosure for federal agent Michael Douglas is a factual witness regarding this account. So I wonder what he bought with crypto. Grub truck surveillance video, and this is between 1:43 a.m. and 1:53 a.m. on the night of the murders, and this is to show Kaylee and Maddie's timeline of events prior to the murders. What the state does not intend on using is Harbor Freight business and surveillance records. So I had speculated on what may have been purchased there, but apparently what may have been purchased is no longer going to be relied on by the state. And either is some financial records for Maddie, some other financial records, Joanne Fabric's financial records. So what's next is going to be a Latah County Sheriff's Deputy Darren Duke's body camera. And then also the citation on August 21st, 2022. And that's what I was just referencing without the seatbelt, but that he was speeding. Whatever he purchased in Marshall's is no longer going to be used against him. The Marshall's financial record for Bryan Kohberger is no longer going to be used. The National Weather Service records for November 12th, 13th, they're going to be used against Bryan Kohberger. I'm assuming if he says he was stargazing, they're going to say it was overcast. PNC Bank records for Bryan Kohberger. The state has provided specifics regarding the relevance of this information in the state's expert disclosure for FOA Michael Douglas. And then also a Pennsylvania State Employee Credit Union for Bryan Kohberger. They're going to be, again, financial records. Sunset Mart surveillance video for November 13th. This is on Moscow, and this is going to show this is video approximately 0.5 miles from the crime scene, and they're going to rely on video footage of around 3:28 a.m. showing the suspect vehicle in the area of the crime scene prior to the homicide. Also a Sunset Mart in Pullman, and this is for at approximately 5:25 a.m. and 5:26 a.m. showing the suspect vehicle in Pullman, Washington after the homicides. Let's see. TikTok user records for Xana Kernodle, and this is showing that Xana Kernodle on her TikTok application at approximately 3:16 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. They're going to utilize T-Mobile phone records for Kaylee and Dylan, and this is to provide a timeline for events for those guys prior to the homicides and to corroborate state witness testimony. This one's interesting. The Under Armour transaction records for Bryan Kohberger. This is no longer going to be or intended to be relied on as evidence. But the U.S. Chef Store in Clarkston, Washington, surveillance video of November 13th. The relevant footage is taken from November 13, 2022. The state may rely on video footage from approximately 12:42 and 12:44 p.m. and to show the defendant's vehicle and actions after the hours of the homicides. Defendant does not have a 49 listed in his response. The state is keeping the same numbers as defendant's response for consistency. Verizon records for Ethan, Bethany, and Jack Decor. And I know it says BJ, but I'm pretty sure it means BF. The state would seek to show phone records for Ethan, Bethany, and Jack on November 13th. This evidence provides a timeline of events for the homicides and corroborates state witness testimony. which includes the return attached Verizon call detail records for Ethan, Bethany, and Jack. This is provided to the defendant around April 4th. Walmart surveillance financial records for Bryan Kohberger. The state no longer intends to rely on this evidence. I thought this was huge because I thought that there was the purchase of a jumpsuit at Walmart a couple of days before the murders. At least that's what I had heard on some sort of document or docuseries. So I thought this would have been it. Doesn't mean it's not it. It's just this specific record isn't going to be utilized against him. Washington Department motor vehicle surveillance video and registration for Bryan Kohberger for his vehicle. See here it says Winco financial records for Bryan Kohberger. The state no longer intends to utilize that. And also neither does it intend on using the financial records and video surveillance for Bethany, Dylan, Kaylee, Maddie, and or Xana. So that is not the location where maybe they intersected points. Washington State University surveillance, WSU video surveillance. This is between approximately 5:28 and 5:30, showing the suspect vehicle up to the homicide in Pullman, Washington. WSU parking records. The state introduced these records to show Bryan Kohberger's Hyundai Elantra is registered with WSU system and had an active permit at WSU. All righty. So now that goes into like some of the exhibits that were attached to the documents here. So here's the Amazon official communication from Amazon. A lot of different stuff here. So let's kind of just, some of the stuff we've already seen and discussed. These are just some of these are just documents to like Amazon or to AT&T saying they need certain information. These are the warrants, stuff we've seen before. There's a lot of that in this 70-page document. Here's a receipt store from the Corner Club. And then they have two other receipts that are blacked out. Now, I wonder what these receipts are for. Obviously, these are receipts for Bryan Kohberger, and they're somewhat prejudicial, so that's why they're blacked out. They're just redacted. Now, here's the interesting part. So it starts off on page 34, and this is a May 5th, 2020 crime scene scenario final. So this is, I guess, a document that he had to write up. It's I guess him breaking down what happens at a crime scene. And it's pretty eerie, but it tells you how much thought he put into what investigators would have done. And let's put on our I don't want to say psychic hats, but I said this a long time ago, and I use specific words on purpose. I said that Bryan Kohberger had been trained on how not to take a crime scene with him and how not to contaminate a crime scene. And I use specific words like that a long time ago for a specific reason. And I think today we're going to find out why. So here this is Bryan C. Kohberger for Professor Dave Sepp. This is CJ 361, May 5th, 2020, crime scene scenario final. Arriving at the crime scene, the first thing to be done is to block off the crime scene in order to avoid the crime scene contamination. So the first thing that this guy is talking about is contaminating a crime scene. And I said a long time ago that this guy knows how not to contaminate a crime scene. That is one of the things that he had to be taught. That is some training. There is certain things that go into a when you're investigating a crime. That is the motive, means, and opportunity. Motive. This is, I don't think it's a big question mark. This guy clearly, I think his motive was more on the same lines of like BTK, the Night Stalker, Zodiac Killer. Any of your name your serial killers. I think it was more along those lines than any type of vendetta or a personal attack against any of these specific victims. I don't think any of them did anything to him to trigger something like this. I think this was just something that, he was just a psycho and a serial offender in the making. I mean, remember, this was the first time he was on his own. Up until this point, he lived with mommy and daddy his entire life. So the first time he's on his own, within the first few months, he's having problems at work, and then he's being accused of committing a quadruple homicide. I mean, it is what it is. But the first thing that he talks about is how not to contaminate a crime scene. Like I said, avoiding contaminating a crime scene and taking the crime scene with you is something that you need to prepare for. All right, keeping people out of the scene minimizes evidence contamination, though many may be curious to see what occurred. The theory of transfer states with what we bring something with us, this crime scene, and take something away. And I remember saying specifically this. The theory of transfer states that we bring something with us to the crime scene and take something away, thus skewing the crime scene from the original state by contamination. This is because the original state of the crime scene was left by the criminal suspect. A lack of contamination allows the scene to be a snapshot in time. People to be kept out of the scene include unauthorized civilians and any more than other absolute minimum number of law enforcement agents and forensic crime professors, which is one of the reasons why I told you guys when it came to like the affidavit of Brett Payne and Blaker. One of them had to be informed later that there was a knife sheath underneath the body of a victim, and one of them saw it. We found out in documents that it was in fact Brett Payne, Brett Payne was the person who actually discovered the actual knife during his examination of the crime scene. It's a small room. You're not going to have more people than you need in that small room. So from the vantage point of where the other officer was, he probably wasn't in there and could not see the knife. Now, I do know that the PCA says when viewed from the door, but it doesn't say that you can see the knife from the door. It says that the knife was on a certain location when viewed from the door, not that you can see the knife from the door. So it's two different things. It would be as if I were to tell somebody that if they were approaching my house from the left side of my house, if you're facing it from the front, if you're approaching it from the left side, the right side of where you're walking, that's the backyard. And so, I mean, to me, it's about a matter of perspective, not a matter of view. So it's stating that when you're standing from the door frame, or when you're standing from the door, that the knife sheath was located on to the right of Maddie, which is an indication that she was probably on her side. She wasn't facing either up or down. She was probably on her side when she passed. So to Maddie's right side would be, that's why you would put that description of where that location was. All righty. And, the description of the crime that he's investigating in this scenario for his final is weird too. It involves a woman whose life was taken in a similar fashion to how these murders had occurred, with a knife. And so let's continue this. It states here that I must call my immediate supervisor, informed of the deceased white female, who's approximately 35 years of age. Let's see. Officers who are not needed at the residence should ensure that the general area is searched for anything that stands out as well. This includes the area of a trailer park, which contains 62 trailers. So in this scenario, he's talking about that officers need to go out and canvass. So he's aware of canvassing and that this is how a crime scene should be investigated. And he's very detailed in this. I'm not going to read everything that he wrote in this because this would take, a bit. But this guy is extremely detailed in what is expected in a crime scene and how you would approach the crime scene and investigate it, which I think goes a long ways. As I was mentioning, the means aspect of this, right? I almost got away from that. The opportunity, the motive, and the means. The opportunity was he out and about at the specific time of the incident, or does he have an alibi? And the answer to that is he does not have an alibi. He was out and about, and he was in the area, so he had the opportunity to commit this crime. The means on it is more than just, is he capable of committing this crime? Does he have the strength? Does he have the dexterity, the culpability of committing the crime. It's also, does this person, whoever committed this crime, have the ability to commit the crime in the same manner that this crime was committed, meaning that with a lack of DNA and evidence. The fact that they used DNA off of a knife sheath means that there was not much DNA, if not any, left behind by the suspect. Now there is an argument that there is some DNA that potentially is underneath the fingernail of Madison Mogen, which is inconclusive at this time. The defense wants to have that thrown out. The state is saying, no, it's close enough to be of an inconclusive amount that it does not exclude Mr. Kohberger as potentially being the person who had left or whose DNA is underneath said fingernail. So there's going to be an argument of experts in that situation. However, outside of that, there's no hair, there's no blood, no semen, none of those things, because those would have been utilized instead of the touch DNA that was on the button of the knife sheath. So because they use that, we know that that's probably the strongest piece of evidence that they have as far as DNA goes, and it's single source and et cetera, et cetera. So somebody committed this crime without leaving DNA and all these other things behind. And it's not something that is usually accomplished by somebody who's on steroids, who's roid raging, or a drug cartel who doesn't care and is just trying to send a message, or a love drunk kid who's upset because his ex-girlfriend is moving away and is taking their dog with him. Those scenarios, there's usually other evidence. You have evidence, and he talks about it in his scenario here, that there's other evidence that usually is an indication of, like, for instance, a crime of passion. You'll have DNA in certain areas that you would expect, because in those moments, those type of moments are out of uncontrol. So you're not thinking about leaving DNA behind or hiding DNA or any of those type of things. And so you would expect to see certain types of evidence in certain areas for this crime to have been committed in the manner that they're supposing. And so if he's going into that much detail here, I mean, if he was planning out this murder, like many people believe and how he's charged, then he must have gone into even more detail, because this was his life on the line. Because he gets caught like he did, firing squad is what's going to end up taking care of him. So I'll leave it with that. But the means is important. Who else had the means of pulling off a crime like this, leaving little DNA behind? It had to have been somebody well trained, somebody who understood almost every aspect of an investigation. I said it a long time ago that he left the backsliding glass door open from the moment that he walked into that room or into that house, and he never touched it again. I said this over a year ago, and I was vindicated just a couple of weeks ago when we found out that Murphy was barking at the same time, that there may have been a struggle ensuing in Xana's room, meaning that Murphy had to have gone out of an open door to be able to bark outside. And meaning that backsliding glass door was open the entire time. And the reason why you do that is because if he were to close it, so you open it, you touch it once, you close it, you touch it twice. You're running out. Now you're running. You've exerted yourself. You're sweaty. You've committed a quadruple homicide. Now you have to reach and touch the door a third time. This time you're sweaty and breathing heavy and all these other things. And so the likelihood of you getting your DNA on that door when you're going out is high. So that's why you leave it open. The trip that he took, that took an hour going south of Moscow instead of going straight to Pullman, was in efforts to elude that investigation as well. Law enforcement is going to come in here and say, all right, we have this crime. We have 4 people whose lives were taken and somebody seen leaving at a high rate of speed. Give me the cameras for the cities nearby. All right, we got Pullman. How far is Pullman? Pullman's 10 miles away, 10 minutes away. All right, I want video from exactly 4:20 when this crime had occurred. I don't care if it's impossible for him to have zapped from here to there. I want it from 4:20, and I want an hour from 4:20 to 5:20. Well, he didn't go back in until almost 5:40. Right? Now, why do you think that is? Now it makes sense, right? You take this long trip because, well, detectives have how many tips at this time? How many videos are they canvassing in the area, and what are they looking for? They're looking for so much. They don't have time to sit and look at every city all day to see if a vehicle pulls in. They're going to look for specific times relative to when the crime had occurred and then move on. And so the mere fact that he drove by there at 5:36 a.m. should be an indication that this guy was um, knowledgeable to the point where he knew that, hey, they're going to be checking probably up to an hour. I have to take an hour to get home, more than an hour. So that way I'm not caught on camera, because they're not just going to check Pullman. They're going to check Bigsby. They're going to check Uptown or Utown or Coeur d'Alene. They're going to check all the cities in that Spokane, Washington. All right, it takes an hour. I want video 30 minutes after the murders to an hour after the murders of Spokane to see what's going on for that time frame. You know, depending on how far you are is going to determine how when you're going to get those videos, and to determine to see if your suspect fled that town in that direction. All right. And if we remember correctly, that Moscow Police Department did not travel outside of Moscow until after the video or the image of the white Elantra that was taken off of that gas station that was connected to a highway that led out of town. After that, they started going out of town and searching for gas station videos in different cities. That's when we first started hearing about that. That told me then, back then, that they didn't have images of him leaving town, which means, and now that we see how much effort he puts into this crime scene, he probably put a lot of effort into getting away with the crime too, which is why there's no surprise there's no DNA in the car. He probably Dextered the crap out of it. Well, anyways, for him to go into all this detail like that, he would have had to have planned out a route that would have gotten him an opportunity, would have had a less chance of him getting caught on camera, on good cameras. And what I mean by good cameras, I'm talking about state issued or state monitored cameras, not Ring devices or personal security devices. Those devices typically don't have the same capability and resolution that state cameras and city municipal cameras have on traffic cameras and stuff like that. So you would have probably have planned that out completely as well. But this just to go into effect of that, of how detailed this guy was. If there is anyone in the trailer, should they be moved and questioned? Does she have kids? I should gather the information in my notes as the investigation commences, which will later be included in my preliminary report with the details of the case. So let's see. Since the offender was not there, I would be unable to record this information initially. Let's see. The equipment I have on hand for the investigation. Now, this is important because remember, he does not want to contaminate a crime scene. So this is the equipment that he would take into a crime scene with him. And part of his equipment is to ensure that he doesn't contaminate it. So he has a 35 millimeter camera and digital camera capable of videotaping with an adequate supply of film and power, a portable lighting system to ensure quality photographs and that I do not miss or overstep any evidence, asserted steel tape measures that can reach at least 25 feet, a ruler or other measurement making devices, latent fingerprint equipment, gloves to protect the scene from contamination. This will eliminate that I avoid leaving my latent fingerprints. Forceps and small tweezers and a pair of scissors, a small saw to take evidence, for example, drywall, filter paper or small swabs of liquid evidence for trace evidence, various evidence containers and liquid for solid evidence, paper envelopes for physical evidence, evidence tape to seal off evidence containers, casting material to take mold of possible footprints around the perimeter with a rubber container for the mixture. A magnifying device should be kept. Crime scene tape for the scene. Protective clothing, where he's going to need boot covers, eyewear, fiber-free overalls, face masks, hair nets, gowns, and anything that will prevent me from contaminating the scene with things I bring in with me. Things I bring in with me. I believe those were the exact words I used. That he didn't want to contaminate, that he was taught and studied how not to contaminate the crime scene with things that he's going to bring with him, and how not to take a crime scene with him. That those two things were important. Maybe I had access to something like this before. I don't know. A blue light with yellow glasses, which makes small trace evidence more visible, can be to ensure the photo was taken of all evidence. There can be a small amount of blood, which wouldn't have been sampled, documented, or photographed otherwise. Or maybe I am psychic. I mean, I know I keep interrupting those on TikTok. Don't know I'm reading a document and then interrupting it. It's either maybe somebody told me something, maybe I read something, or maybe I'm psychic, or maybe I'm just lucky. But I keep getting things right. Let's see. I must ensure myself and my fellow crime scene personnel are wearing gloves and other protective equipment to avoid contaminating the scene with latent fingerprints. A fiber-free boot cover would also be ideal to avoid leaving physical footprints or residue from the boot. Anything that is fiber-free and covers the mouth, hair, and overall body would be helpful in avoiding a crime scene contamination, since hair, saliva, skin cells, and other bodily fluid or cells may be added to the scene, thus contaminating it. Fibers can be left via the theory of exchange and would contaminate the crime scene from its initial state as the offender left it. So contaminating a crime scene was something that he really took priority over. I mean, he's talked about wearing protective gear, I think twice now, maybe 3 times. He's mentioned contaminating the crime scene since initially entering the crime scene from the word go. I mean, it's not like, hey, I got a call and I walked in and I saw somebody and then I started. It's my initial call is to avoid contamination. He doesn't even know what's happening. At this point in the scenario, life-threatening measurements, deciding whether to have an ambulance there or not has not yet been decided, etc. So initially, I mean, his whole point of view, or a lot of his attention is at contaminating the crime scene. Even if we can't assume, so let's continue, there was an offender despite seeming obvious prevention contamination, it is an important way to ensure integrity of the investigation and evidence. We should always treat the crime scene as if there is indeed a criminal homicide, as to not miss out on important details. That is how the crime scene is being handled. First thing for me to do is take coordinate series of crime scene photos with a digital photography device, 35mm camera, from a natural point of view. And this just goes into how detailed he is. These photos must be taken prior to movement of any object of the crime scene to ensure that the photo captures the scene as the offender left it. The photographs should be taken from a general view from an exterior of the home, as well as general views of the interior, recording the time and details of the photograph in my notes. All right, let's kind of fast forward this a little bit. Then it talks a little bit about the crime scene, right? And it says here that because he continues, I mean, up to this point, he's continuing to talk about how to take good pictures. But right here, then he goes, the next photos of the specific room should be taken with special attention to the living room in which the deceased woman was found. The body and physical evidence to take a picture prior to collection of forensic services of a criminal investigator includes the deceased woman in the living room, who should be photographed under adequate lighting from a long view. Specific shots should be focused on the evidence of harm on her body and clothing, the bruises on her face and the marks on her neck, the bloody shirt, and the other signs of post-mortem lividity should be photographed and taped without moving the victim. A measurement marker should be placed next to her. This will show if an offender moved the woman as to manipulate the crime scene. Does she have defensive wounds? Are there hesitation marks on her related to the knife? Are there multiple stab wounds? These are photographed and taped. Is marked on her neck related to the hanger near her? The photograph make it sure that these items were indeed present at the crime scene. The time of death is never entirely accurate. The photographs can add or can aid in this process as they capture the phenomenon such as rigor mortis and purification when a woman is found. The knife should be photographed under adequate light, and a marker should be placed next to the knife to give its best photographic representation of the evidence. Misshapen coat hanger should be photographed under the same adequate light. The upended furniture and children's furniture should be photographed firstly from a long view and then focus specifically on each piece furniture under adequate lighting with measurement marker. I mean, the guy wasn't a psycho. He would be very meticulous at this, at being an investigator. But that's what I think aided him in his efforts to get away with this crime. I mean, from all indications was that Moscow Police Department had no clue who this guy was until December 19th when his name came up through the IGG. And had he not left the knife sheath behind, as dumb and as stupid as the mistakes that he made, I think he would have maybe gotten away with it. And people saying leaving the knife sheath isn't consistent. I think I see that, Myra Foster. I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to, but like, you know, if you're saying that this guy was smart and he was this meticulous, leaving the knife sheath doesn't make sense. Again, as I mentioned before, his behaviors around 4 a.m. after the DoorDash delivery was made shows somebody making mistakes, somebody that is nervous. It's, you know, he can't even park. He's having struggles driving. He hits the horn. He has to stop and think about things. Then he does another back turnaround. I mean, there's a lot of things that he's doing in that moment. He hasn't even gotten into the house. You know, it's kind of like anything else. You know, when I was in law enforcement, my first, went through the academy and then the FTO, which is field training office, having a field training officer who for about 6 months is a partner that trains you on the job. You know, all that's great and dandy. And then, you know, the first night you're out there at 3 o'clock in the morning and you see a couple of hooligans and your backup is quite a distance away, and you see some suspicious activity going on. You know, are you going to get out of that vehicle? You know, how does your training act? You know, all those things, you know, your first fight, first time you hear gunfire, sometimes that goes out the window the first time. You know what I mean? Big Blue, he was a guy who is in the medical field, and he talked about how, you know, he had done CPR and a bunch of other things and been trained. And the first time, you know, sometimes that training goes out the window, especially when you're doing something very serious. I mean, in this scenario here, I mean, it doesn't matter how much he trained or how much he planned for this. Planning and training and doing are two different things. And making mistakes, you know, is part of human nature. He was intelligent. He wasn't perfect. You know, he wasn't a god. He made mistakes. He made many of them. He made so many, I'm surprised people are shocked that he got caught with all the mistakes that he made. And they seem to be piling up and continue to pile up. Hey, what's going on? Yes, we do. I brought you up earlier, doctor. So I can explain his behavior. Maybe we need to plan another live. Yes, 100%. Let's get together and let's plan a live. Maybe if you're free Friday, I have no Friday live. Let's try to do that so we can go through some of this. All right. So here's some interesting stuff though, right? Because remember, early on in the investigation, or not in the investigation, but early on when Bryan Kohberger was arrested, some people started coming out, and one of the persons that came out, I think, was a neighbor who stated that he had a conversation with Bryan about the murders, and this was way early on, before anybody knew anything, and that Bryan Kohberger had mentioned something to the effect that the crime appears to be a crime of passion, right? And so we had Kaylee, who was out of the relationship, and Steve mentioning early on that the injuries don't match. And my assumption is that the injuries to Kaylee were more ferocious. My suspicion is because Madison was attacked first, that Kaylee woke up, she was in the same bed, and, you know, he didn't have the privilege, so to speak, to attack Kaylee. I hate to say it that way. You know, you have the privilege of surprise, right? She was awake. She was alert already to a certain extent, or she was waking up. She wasn't asleep. So the surprise attack there wasn't necessarily the same. So he had to have acted fast. So my assumption is it's the ferocity of the injuries is what's different, but I honestly do not know. But he mentioned that it was a crime of passion back early on. And I wonder if maybe perhaps he made things appear to be that way. And he kind of goes over in this document of some things to look for when it's a domestic violence type of situation. And I wonder if he may have done something to make it appear as if that be the case. You know, I know there's been rumors and speculation that maybe perhaps there was more than just the knife. Maybe a punching or strangulation may have been involved. I don't know. I've not asked any of the victims' family members about the injuries to their loved ones, and I won't ask like that. You know, I may ask Steve, later on, like, hey, what did you mean by the injuries weren't the same? I'm not going to ask him to go into detail about the injuries of his daughter. That's not right. And so, but if they were different and there may have been something like that, could it have been, Bryan Kohberger trying to give an illusion that this may have been the motive? And let's talk about what he says here. He says here, is there a sign of forced entry? This would be evident by broken glass from windows, pry marks on doors or windows surrounding the house. This should be photographed, videotaped, and documented. If there is not forced entry, it may be suggested that the woman knew her killer. The video camera will be used to go over evidence and photographed. Let's see. And so right there, like I said, he kind of goes into that. He also goes into other things. I may have already passed it, to be honest with you, of it potentially being a spousal type of thing. The next thing he talks about is crime scene sketch. Let's see. All right. Though it appears obvious that the knife was used in this crime, we do not know for sure and should make sure to document everything and look for less apparent evidence. I wonder if, because to me, this is interesting based on what we know, right? He left the knife sheath behind. In his crime, there was a knife used, and I wonder if he did something so that it would, although it was apparent, that maybe try to throw off law enforcement, right? And he continues to say, even if there is an item introduced to the scene by an offender to throw off investigators, it is not the job of the investigator processing the crime scene to jump to conclusions. That's weird, right? Even if there was an item introduced to the crime scene by the offender to throw off investigators, like a something left behind, like a knife sheath. If you know what I'm saying, it is not the job of the criminal investigator to process the crime scene to jump to conclusion. The crime lab will be able to decipher with scientific certainty what is and is not original element of the crime. Staging is common. For example, oh, I went too far. Where'd it go? All right, there it is. Staging is common. For example, the offender may have taken items from the house to make it look like a burglary turned robbery, which went wrong. I am choosing to draw to scale, which equals 1 foot. The computer-aided design program CAD, which uses laser lights takes up to 25,000 measurements per second in 3D. See, I wonder if it's bothering him, because remember they're objecting to the model because it's not up to scale, right? And he has that OCD stuff going on. And I wonder if it's on purpose. Because you see right here, he's like, I would have it on scale and it would be 1/4 inch equals to 1 foot, blah, 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 3D model, yada, yada, yada. And then the state's like, nah, we're just gonna introduce this this house for ants, for my Zoolander fans. Is this a crime scene for ants? It's going to be a little 3D model, right? Well, anyways, I wonder if they're doing that on purpose to mess with him. Apparently he's got a problem, with his emotions, and that the defense is worried that his behavior may be an issue, with the jury looking at him. Maybe they're going to try to make him sweat a little bit. Maybe they're going to try to push his buttons, one being not something in scale. Wonder if that's a possibility. Let's see. The more comprehensive crime scene search using script search method. Let's see. In order to collect evidence from the interior of the residence, I will assign roles to the officers, briefing them to watch where they're stepping and not to act impulsively or without great care. Hastily actions will lead to valuable evidence being trampled and lost. The strip search method is what I have decided on. It allows for the interior of the crime scene to be searched from one end to the other with more than one officer or forensic processing unit. The exterior of the property should be searched from one end to the other as well, switching to a grid search if necessary. Walking from one end of the crime scene to the opposite end, I will then turn around and cover the ground to the right or to the left without stepping on the same spot twice. Pretty detailed. I mean, should you expect something like this out of someone who's, in the field and talking about this crime scene? Yeah. But it's just eerie how close it is to the crime. And also, it kind of just tells you that this guy has thought of everything and how much he's gone into thought of what an investigation goes into. Let's see. Let's go down. Collection of items, evidence. The crime scene photography, larger items, physical evidence are taken first. This includes disheveled furniture, children's furniture, cell phone and computer, if they're the knife and a coat hanger. And this is relative to this crime scene that he's referring to. The knife should be examined for latent fingerprints to be logged separately. Same with the coat hanger. Oh, you know what you forgot is it should also be tested for DNA. Maybe that's what you were hoping for. They were just going to check it for fingerprints and not DNA. Same, and here's the interesting part. Same with the coat hanger, doorknobs around the house, upended furniture, cell phone, and virtually any physical evidence big enough to grab. So he has in mind that the perpetrator could have grabbed something, including a doorknob. Again, this goes to why I think he only opened the door once and never touched it again. Is there evidence of SA or semen present? If the evidence should be marked, swabbed, collected. Did the offender take something, or did the offender display an excess need for control over the victim as demonstrated by possible SA and taking their life? There are all observations to be recorded, not conclusively. Sorry about that. All right, so let's see. Packaging the evidence for the forensic lab. Each item I collect, including but not limited to the knife, coat hanger, and bloody clothing on the women, must be packaged in the proper way for forensic lab analysis. I must use separate containers for evidence, not mixing things up, causing confusion. No matter how daunting this may be, I must use new, clean packaging that was not previously used to avoid contamination. Obviously, blood and other biological evidence renders a container spent. Avoiding metal containers, which can be reused, is ideal to confirm what the container is indeed disposed of afterward. The package must be sealed with a strong medium, such as strong tape. Items of clothing need to be kept in as is and not folded. I must keep evidence that found in another container as is marked it. I must include a letter of transmissibility Middle state what type of analysis must be done. For example, wound analysis, DNA, fingerprinting, even ballistics. Again, I must account for and log all the evidence in chain of custody form. The woman must be removed by a certified professional and sealed, taken into custody by the coroner, and sent to the forensic medical examiner for forensic autopsy. This must all be logged on the field notes and initial crime report before completed and closing report. The crime scene will be surveyed if necessary, but the longer time it takes to do so, the more the chances the crime scene will be contaminated. There's that word again. Really, really, really concerned about contamination. When mailed, I must always send the evidence in registered, mailed, and closed with a secure receipt. This careful collection of evidence is all necessary for the crime lab crime analysis to be capable of analyzing all elements of the crime, being that they rarely come from the scene. If she had a cell phone or computer or nearby, this should be described, logged, and transported to a digital forensic lab for forensic examination. Did she communicate with anyone? Did this communication indicate conflict? Did her husband or boyfriend contact her? Did anyone else contact her? This may help investigators look in the right direction. If things turn out to be not so obvious, again, we cannot assume it was the husband or boyfriend just because there may be a history of domestic violence or PFA, despite this being very common. Also, she may have children's furniture for her nieces and nephews, so we can't assume that she has kids. Outreach to other agencies, immediate elements of investigation. So this is the interesting part, right? So Bryan Kohberger says, this is his own words. These are his words, that the husband or boyfriend of the deceased woman should be contacted to establish an alibi. He needs to be immediately located and questioned. Even Bryan Kohberger says that having an alibi immediately is important to the investigation. Dude. Talk about, man, showing your guilt. So here's some other stuff. So where were the neighbors when this happened? Their alibi should be evident and supported. Did they notice anything unusual? So he has the acuity to, or the thought of, all right, neighbors, which kind of goes into effect of what time this murder happened and why it may have happened at that time as well. The Amber Alert can be, this is if there's children missing, eyewitnesses, and surveillance footage in the trailer park surrounding areas, drugstore, which oversee the trailer, or nearby gas station can give us information on this crime. Surveillance footage is circumstantial evidence, but may lead to investigators in the right direction and to the apprehension of the suspect. Foreseeing a little bit there, huh? Let's see. If we can't gather conclusive information by the end of the investigation, the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehensive Program, VICAP, can help. VICAP may be utilized in this case if this case happens to be unrelated to domestic dispute. This may be the work of a serial offender. This is highly unlikely. Still, we are only looking for facts of the investigation rather than conjecture. And we can only say for sure once the suspect is apprehended that the evidence is strong enough to say what happened with scientific certainty. I agree. My notes established that I wrote a thorough and accurate preliminary case report which contained all the facts of the case. The closing report will be the culmination of all of the facts after investigation and lab analysis, which led to the most accurate reconstruction of the scene possible. With thorough documentation, it is unlikely the defense will be able to discredit the investigation and render evidence inadmissible. I agree. And here is the, somebody wrote something about, I am an employee of Dick's Sporting Goods. Documentation withheld that I supervised and made the search for records for searching for transactions outlined as requested. Man, that was hard to read. And these are just some other things that were associated with the stuff that we spoke about earlier. I don't think I highlighted anything here. You got a Washington driver's license. But he got this driver's license July 1st. All righty. And this last one is notice of appearance. Oh, okay. So Miss Allen is the magic question. Like, can you be, this is for the jury questionnaire. So, all right, let's look at some questions. Let's answer some questions for about 10, 15 minutes. Take your questions, and then we'll call it a show. I start some stuff. If you're in the live chat, I would recommend, if you want me to answer your question, best bet is probably super chat, to be honest with you. All right, let's see. Don't understand why he thinks he qualified to school at Pullman PD in cellular and cloud forensics. Oh, I already read that one. Let me pull this up real quick. Okay, and all right, there we go. I'll put you on the bigger screen so I can see better. Daniel, I don't understand how BK didn't get diagnosed with ASD until he was 27, 28 years old. His parents both worked for school district. They weren't teachers, but they were in schools. I thought he was diagnosed with something early, but I'm not sure. Been trying to get Kohberger channels to submit their theories to defense. So far, no dice. Thank you for your 1999 super chat, Long Island Hillbilly. Thank you. How far was his apartment from where his first catch him on camera? I don't know. Oh, thank you, Shelly. Stuart, thank you, Daniel, for all your hard work and bringing this to us. I appreciate that. Karen comes in with a $4.99 super sticker. Artworks comes in with a $1.99 super chat. Document indicates Xana TikTok 316. I thought 416. I thought it was 412 is what it says in the PCA. But to be honest with you, there was some other mistakes that were in there. It said BJ instead of BF. So I wouldn't be surprised if they meant 4 and they hit 3. Elizabeth asks, he's done. BK is not that smart. No, he's not. He thought he was a lot smarter than what he is. Patricia Warner comes in with a $5 super chat. Thank you so much, Patricia. Natalie James comes in and says DT has been outstanding at developing this case for us in detail with facts and consistency. Much appreciated. Thank you so much, Natalie. We appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you. And Artworks comes in with his membership for 10 months now. Myra Foster says, person has been accused of a quadruple homicide because a trace DNA was found on a sheath. Explaining using the knowledge and techniques you have acquired, how could you aid the defense counsel? Well, I'm not sure if you're asking me, but I think the thing is, it's not only that there was trace DNA found on a knife sheath, which is why he was arrested. You know, there's more to it. You know, as far as why he was arrested, there was the fact that he didn't, that his phone was off during the time of the murders. There was a vehicle matching his vehicle that was seen outside during that time as well. It also was matched his vehicle down to the front license plate. He had, what else was there at the time of the arrest? The description also didn't exclude him. So the mere fact of the DNA would have given him probable cause just alone on that for the arrest. Now, what do they have since then? They've had the purchase of the knife and the knife sheath and the sharpener. They've also had several purchases of different things, including a backpack, balaclava mask, or however you pronounce it. Basically, his entire kill kit has been receipts for his entire kill kit has been located. You know, you also have the fact that he's going to have members of his own family testify against him. You know, we've seen that in documents. So it sounds like they're going to testify as to when he purchased the knife, and that he had purchased the knife, and that he was looking at purchasing another knife shortly after the murders. So it's not looking good for Mr. Kohberger. There's a lot of evidence. You can't look at just one piece of evidence and say, hey, this doesn't make sense because all they have is this one thing. I mean, that's like looking at my question that I tell everybody, 10 plus 10 plus 5 plus 5 is 30. I mean, literally all you're doing is saying, hey, I'm not really seeing 30 out of just 10. Well, you have to add the other 10 and the 2 5s to equal 30. You're not going to get it just out of the 10. Just like this, you're not going to get the he did it just out of the DNA. You got to add everything else to it. Put a couple stars if you don't mind. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I truly do. Put a couple of stars. But again, I'm not sure if you're asking me. I mean, you might be asking somebody else this question. Should BK be charged with helping BK? Wait, what? Should BK Days be charged for helping BK? I'm sorry, I'm not sure. That was a funny name, though. Let's see. Not seeing any stars. BK pulling a Lori Valu? I don't think so. I mean, he's going to try, right? He's going to try, but I don't think he's going to get that far. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining the membership, Doctor. I appreciate that. Thank you. Let's see. Any questions on the TikTok? Yeah, we're talking about the Idaho 4 case. For those that aren't, I know some folks come in here. Let's see. Which sister do you think is the witness? If I had to take a guess, I would assume the one that had their phone stolen in 2014. But that's just a guess. I mean, if I'm right, that's 50-50. I honestly do not know. I've never spoken to anybody from the Bryan Kohberger family or his family members, any witnesses or sisters, any of those folks. So complete guess, I would have to say the one that got the phone stolen. What do you think, Bill Thomas, as a prosecutor? Well, I don't know yet. You know, I was not impressed when Judge was the judge. And I think I was less impressed with the judge than I was with Bill Thompson. So far, I think he's doing a good job. I will be honest, the female, Jennings, I think is her name, is how can I put it? She doesn't paint a picture the right way, and she is confusing sometimes, and it comes off a little bit like a little bit all over the place, just in a few places. You know what I mean? I think that maybe perhaps the stage is a little big right now, given the impact of the defendant and the how large that this case is, and the publicity of the case, that maybe perhaps all eyes watching these pre-trial stuff. Maybe by the time the trial comes, she'll be a little bit more confident being in front of the camera. But outside of that, I think that the prosecution has done okay. I think they could have done better. I think they could have been more transparent, to be honest with you. You know, I think they could have been more transparent from a long time ago. And I think that's the only thing that I have not maybe perhaps sided with, or maybe perhaps have had a problem with. It was just basically that, just like, hey, let's be a little bit more transparent. Let's not seal everything. Let's put some information out there so that way these misinformation and these rumors can kind of come to a stop. But for those that don't know, Bill Thompson, who's on the thumbnail, he's the prosecutor. Did BK ask himself the question? I don't know. Will Hunter be a witness? Which Hunter? There's two. Timeline is way off. What timeline, though? Because remember, in the beginning, they said that they were looking for the white Elantra between 3 and 4:30. Or 3:30 and 4:30. I mean, the murders happened at 4. A lot of people assume that when they said that they were looking for the white Elantra in the area around 3:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, they assumed that that was the time that the murders happened. That wasn't the time that the murders happened. That was just the time that the white Elantra was seen on camera, which is accurate. They have really never said anything outside of that. The timeline has never been off. I have no idea why people say this. The only thing I can think of is that some folks got confused by the time frame and that thinking that when law enforcement said that they were looking for the occupant or occupants of a white Elantra at between the hours of 3 and 4 in the morning, or 3 and 4:30 in the morning, that that was the time at 3 o'clock or 3:30 is the time in which the murders occurred. That was never said. That was never said. You know, and the truth is, at 3:28 is when the vehicle started driving around. It's unseen on Indian Hills Drive, and so they were looking for a white Elantra during that specific time. So, what timeline, if you don't mind, is off? Because I'm confused about it, and I would really like to know exactly what you're referring to as far as the timeline. I mean, the other thing is too, people were saying that because I think people were making an assumption because there was phone calls to Jack Ducour up to about 2:51 or 2:55 a.m. or 3 o'clock that that's when the murders happen or something. That's not. It's at 4:05 or 4:08 is when he pulled up and parked. But please let me know. I really truly am trying to understand that narrative, and maybe I'm not understanding it correctly. Do you think there will be another bombshell piece of evidence? If so, do you think we'll hear about it before, during trial? Thoughts on what we might learn based on the evidence we have? I do think there's going to be some more bombshell evidence. I think we're going to find out that this guy had other victims, to be honest with you. I think we're going to find out that the 1122 King Road isn't the only house that he may have been surveilling. I think we're going to find out that he may have committed other crimes, such as break-ins, whether they were into residences or into the WSU Chem Lab or, office supplies, etc. Something of that nature. I think we're going to find out some disturbing behaviors of his towards women that resulted in him getting fired from. I mean, it wasn't the main result. I mean, it was the fight that he had, or the altercation that he had with his professor, John Snyder, that ultimately got him terminated. But there was an investigation that was done based on some accusations from women that attended WSU, students of his. Although they were cleared, they began documenting things, which is an indication to me that there was some accusations made and that they were a he said, she said type of situation. And that these young ladies were told that if they wanted, if they were really concerned, that they should probably start to document things so that there's a paper trail and not just a, hey, he's did this one time, he did that. Well, when, how, there's no evidence of any of that, right? And I mean, if you're not documenting it, it doesn't exist if it's not on paper. And so they began documenting it. It was called the Bryan tally. We went over this not too long ago. I think it was called Harassment on Campus was the title of the show. But we're going to find out about those things. I think we're going to find out that at one point in his life, he uploaded an app. Now, this is just my speculation, in my opinion. Let's call it Psychic Daniel. That he uploaded an app to somebody's phone, and that person was unaware that app was giving Bryan Kohberger permission of their location. Now, that may have been in high school. That may have been the reason why he got kicked out of the law enforcement class. You know, or that could have been that Northampton. That could have been WSU. But if I was, really, really psychic, which I'm not, I would have guessed probably the first one. What got him kicked out of the law enforcement class? But we'll see. We'll see what happens in court. Let me see. Will BK have to testify in order to give his alibi? 100%. That is the only way. That is the only way. How many cases have you ever heard law enforcement go in with a saw and cutting drywall out, Daniel? Quite a bit, actually. In this case here specifically, that happened. There's some pictures of Maddie Mogen's wall that is cut out. I believe, and when they did the demolition of the house, this is one of the reasons why they demolished it. Nobody was going to be able to get inside of it. They knocked down one of the rooms or one of the walls, and you can finally, see inside, and the staircase had been taken off. I'm assuming that every step was processed, so there was no way of anybody traveling in and out of that house or anything. They couldn't go up the stairs. It was not in the same condition. There were pieces of walls missing and stuff. But yeah, it is actually kind of common. Why did his dad fly to Washington and ride BK? Man, that's weird. So according to JLR, which I don't know if this is true. I don't have the same sources as JLR. I don't know who he talks to. I have not heard this. But according to him, he had put down on Twitter that one of the sisters had noticed that Bryan Kohberger had been looking for a K-bar knife after the murders, knew what he was driving, was suspicious, told their father about their suspicion, and the father decided to drive out there and bring him back. And that while he was out there and on the way back, that she called the tip line and notified the FBI of her suspicion. Now, the only thing that I have that could back up or corroborate anything like that is the fact that Howard Bloom had mentioned that there was some sort of grand jury and that there was a witness, and it kind of alluded it to being somebody in the Kohberger family, and that there was a tip line. So I don't know. I mean, I can't. It's not from any source that I know. It's not any information that I've been told, but that's what's been put out there. Kind of makes sense, though. Kind of makes sense. Did BK plant the glove that was found outside of the crime scene when he revised before the scene was discovered? Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting observation, Stephanie. Could he have planted something with somebody else's DNA to try to throw things off? Maybe. If the defense didn't show other text messages from Dylan and Bethany, who we still think they were sleeping, they were awake. I mean, we're going to find that out during the course of the trial, right? Will we know now? I don't know. I don't know. But we would definitely know during the course of the trial that happened, because that was a part of that was specifically one of the ways that they were able to determine when this crime had occurred. Remember, during the PCA, one of the things that they pointed out was the download of the victims' phones and also the download of Dylan and Bethany's phone to determine the time frame in which when this crime was committed. Remember, I told you guys that we're probably going to see something, whether it would be the phone opening or something to that nature, that was going to corroborate the 4 a.m. Time frame. So yeah, I'm pretty sure we knew about it. We didn't know that what they were texting each other, but we did know that there was some sort of phone activity during that time to to notify law enforcement or to help law enforcement with the time that the murders occurred. And they utilize their phones and a download of their phones as an indicator of what time that this happened. And this is a way of doing so. So yeah, 100% we already knew. We just didn't know what it was. We would have found out during trial. So yeah, no doubt in my mind. I bet he did, in fact, spy on the coworker. He set up a video surveillance in her apartment. That's one rumor. That is one rumor. If the killing started at 4 a.m., how was Xana on TikTok commenting at 4:13 on her friend's video? And DM was already calling Kaylee and Maddie, etc., with no response. Now, Kaylee and Maddie calls happened after 4:20. Those happened after 4:20. The 4:13 Xana on the phone. Well, Kohberger didn't go allegedly from his car into Xana's room. He went straight up to the third floor and started there. Remember, Dylan woke up and she thought she heard was Kaylee playing with the dog, and then she hears who she thinks which is weird, Kaylee going upstairs with the dog, and then coming back downstairs running, saying somebody's here. And this is right before she says she hears, and then right after that, she hears somebody say, "It's okay, I'm here to help you." So obviously, it wasn't Kaylee. Even the defense says it wasn't Kaylee because Kaylee had already passed. She was upstairs, and even the defense claims that at this point she was no longer with us. So it had to have been Xana. Now, if Bryan Kohberger parked in the back at 4:08, went upstairs, he still had to get dressed. I still believe he wasn't driving around in his jumpsuit, because then he would have got all his hair and DNA from driving in his car on his jumpsuit. So he probably got out of the car, put that on, and was in the house around 4:11, like a minute before she sends out that text message at 4:12, because it was 4:12, not 4:13. So Bryan Kohberger is probably making entry into the house at 4:11, going up the stairs. A minute later, I think she puts a comment, and then that's the last thing she does. So it's about a minute and a half from the time that the intruder has gotten into the house, gone upstairs, and started doing that before she is stopped moving on her TikTok. So it's pretty quick. It's not that big or wide as you're assuming there. You're adding a lot of time in there. That's not accurate. Do you think additional murders were committed around the time the other smiling picture? Are you talking about the one in 2020 where he's all skinny there too? I don't know. When did I wonder if Nina's in here. When did Ashley Fugel pass? Was that in 2020? Huh. I wonder. Why would the car have Bluetooth and GPS? Wouldn't that track the vehicle? It would, but his doesn't. His doesn't have that, unfortunately. You can tell in the traffic stop that his infotainment center isn't one that has it. So, if it did, then, the defense would have said, "Hey, look, it says he's at the park," but it doesn't, because it doesn't exist. Let's see. It was a pre-planned trip. Yeah. Was the house that reported the suitcase found outside the car with the things rummaged through it and underwear in their cup holder on Queen Road? I recall the body cam footage early on. Yeah, but that was way before I think Bryan Kohberger moved there. I think that was the year before. That, to me, that just kind of shows you the kind of pranks and stuff that were happening in that area. Which is why, maybe Dylan wasn't so keen on calling 911 right away. She may have thought that she was getting pranked, You don't want to be the one to call 911. That's why I asked, should Should his father get charged for helping him possibly dispose evidence on the way to flee? Good question. I mean, he even asked that, right? The problem is 8 hours. It's a problem 8 hours. It can be. But I don't think it's going to end up being a problem in this case. ET show or anyone guess, wasn't the initial timeline around 2 a.m.? No, because she was making phone calls and leaving voicemails and text message, Kaylee, that is until about 3 a.m. on Jack DeCour's phone. So no, it was never that early. PCA says they were sleeping. We know that they were awake. I think the PCA says that originally Dylan, she did something that she was in the top floor, and then that she went downstairs. That all this stuff happened, and then they went to sleep. I'd have to pull up the PCA to be honest with you. Let me pull that up because I don't think you're accurate on that. To be honest with you, don't think you're very accurate on that. But let's pull that up on the PCA just to be, accurate, 100%. That's what we aim for here. We aim to be right. All right. Affidavit. There it is. All right, I'm gonna pull that up here in a second, Babs. Let's see. F3 originally. Okay. Let's share the screen real quick. DM stated she originally went to sleep in her bedroom on the east side of the second floor. DM stated she was awoken approximately 4 a.m. when she stated she sounded like Goncalves playing with her dog in the upstairs bedroom, which are located on the third floor. A short time later, DM said she heard who she thought was Goncalves say something to the effect, "There's someone here." The review of the records obtained footage. The download of Kernodle's phone showed this could have been Kernodle, as her cell phone indicated she was likely awake using TikTok at 4:12, as I mentioned before. DM stated she looked out her bedroom window, not seeing anybody. Said she heard the comment about someone being in her house. DM stated she opened her door a second time. I mean, I don't see anywhere it says the PCA says they were sleeping. It says everything that she said. I don't understand where it says that they say they were sleeping. Mo voice saying something to the effect, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." See, what I think that was so Xana goes running upstairs. She goes upstairs, right? She hears something, backsliding glass doors open. And then she's like, "I think someone's here," and runs downstairs. Bryan Kohberger comes behind her and she's facing him. And he's like, "It's okay. I'm here to help." Right? You get what I'm saying? Like, not necessarily an intruder, but trying to, calm her down before he strikes. It's crazy what he did. But yeah, no, none of this says that she fell asleep or any of those things. Okay. Let me see. Bethany. All right. So the combination of Dylan's statements to law enforcement, forensic downloads of Bethany and Dylan's phone. Like I said before, when you asked earlier, would they have known? Yes, because they used that as to determine the time frame and the video. Lead investigators believe the homicides happened between 4 and 4:25 a.m. So absolutely not. Absolutely not. We know that they weren't asleep during the time because of the PCA. The PCA is 100% accurate. Absolutely not, Mr. or Mrs. Seababs. Absolutely not. All right, I'm just going to scroll through, see if I have any super chats. And I do not. Let's see. Last one from my buddy Jeff. So I'm getting the sense from Kohberger that Dylan not calling 911 because any of us would with 2020 hindsight is far worse offense than the quadruple homicide itself. My mind boggling. Kohbergers are funny. I'll just leave it at that. Last one, because my buddy Patrick. People are making a big deal about DM and BF being awake most of the night, which not really. I mean, they fell asleep about 4:37, then woke up at 10:30, and the initial thing that they did was text Kaylee and Maddie, "Are you awake? Are you up?" Instead of 8 hours of sleep, it was more like 3 hours. where there's no phone activity. I think it was from 4:30 to 10, so about 6 hours of no phone activity. But you're right. And immediately the first thing that happens is, are you up? And obviously they're hoping that it was just a prank, that they're going to say, yes, we tricked you, we got you, ha ha ha, whatever the case may be. But all righty, guys. Well, I hope you guys have a great night. Thank you guys for tuning in. Please like, please subscribe. We went almost 3 hours. I'm probably gonna have to break this down more and more. I'll probably be back on tomorrow night. But until next time, guys, I'll see you guys later. Peace out.